Okay, thank you. Here we are at the ADP meeting for Thursday, February 1st, 2018. First on the, we have a change in the agenda. We'll be taking off the award section and focusing on the two development permits here. So I'll welcome everyone to the Squamish Nation traditional territory. Motion to adopt the agenda as amended. John? Okay. Minutes of meeting from the last ADP, which was in December. Did anyone review and have any comments to that? Motion to adopt the minutes. Chris? Seconded. Thank you. All right. Jumping to the first agenda item is development permit 476 at 1091 Commercial Place, Business Park. Hi.
Hi, okay. Good afternoon. My name is Jessie Fletcher, planner with Community Planning, and we'll introduce the application. So today is an application for development permit located at 1091 Commercial Place for 2 industrial buildings providing 4,770 square meters of industrial space. It complies with the light industrial I1 zone. The site is subject to development permit areas 6 and 6A. However, staff are only treating the east and south frontages to 6A, as only part of the site is within the development permit area 6A. And that's the part that interfaces with the rest of the business park development permit area, while the rest is in the lower form development permit area 6, which is a little confusing, so if you have questions, shoot them my way. Staff are generally supportive of the site plan, but are specifically requesting ADP's comments and recommendations in areas staff feel the application is not or only somewhat meeting development permit area guidelines, and those are highlighted in the back of the report. Under development permit area 6, the guideline states the siting, massing, shape, pattern, roof line, and exterior finish of buildings should be sufficiently varied to avoid a monotonous landscape. Staff feel the project only somewhat meets this guideline. And then under development permit area 6A, the guideline, the siting, massing, shape, rhythm, roof line, and exterior finish of buildings should be sufficiently varied to avoid a monotonous visual appearance. Building materials indigenous to Squamish, such as granite and wood, will be encouraged. Building materials that do not convey a sense of quality or permanence, or which will not withstand excessive rain or wind, should be avoided. Staff feel that while the south face of the buildings do meet this guideline, the east face doesn't quite. And then the following guideline, fronting and flanking elevations should feature canopies, awnings over doorways, and continuously along the building frontage wherever possible. Again, staff don't feel that the east face of building 8 meet this guideline. So I'll pass it over now to the applicants to introduce their project.
Thanks, Jesse. My name is Chris Gowing from MGB Architecture. This is Melissa Knoll, representative of the owner group. Braden Smith from Integrated Construction, and Al Tanzer, the landscape architect. So we want to just get into the presentation. There's a multi-page PDF that we'll be running through up on the screen. I think everyone has copies of the printout of the presentation itself, if that helps to walk through this. If anyone doesn't, we have a few more copies down here, and that complements the other drawings that were already provided on the table. So in terms of context and location, I'm sure everyone is familiar with where this is. Commercial Place as an extension of Commercial Way, terminating an existing cul-de-sac. From a site planning and form of development perspective, it's a light industrial single-story, 2 buildings, in which Building A to the east is contemplated as the main visual frontage on the approach to the site, with loading at the back. Building B is contemplated as offering additional opportunities for demising in smaller units, hence the loading on both frontages of that building. Various elements have been screened and located around the site in terms of refuse collection, secure bike storage, PMT electrical provision for the site, and a lot of attention has been paid to the landscape screening and especially approach to the site. In the southeast corner, you'll see a small plaza that we'll see more of as we get through the presentation, that presents a dominant element as you come towards the main entry of the site, and also provides some amenity space and open area for users and pedestrians. If anyone has any questions about the data specifics, they're here, but also in the packages before you. In terms of how we treated the buildings, conceptually, we're looking at local materials. As Jesse indicated, this was part of the approach for developing an appropriate kit of parts to develop the architectural expression of the buildings, looking at stone slabs, looking for opportunities to bring in a wood expression that to address comments brought up in terms of life cycle durability. May or may not be wood, but that's something that I think will come out in the comments today. Developing a color scheme and a kit of parts that highlights different elements of the building, incorporating a certain level of contrast and visual variety that results from that to avoid any kind of monotony related to a consistent color scheme throughout the use on the building. Photographs along the bottom illustrate some of the conceptual images that we used as we worked through this. Obviously, this building type is mainly constructed in a tilt-up, a concrete construction system. So the use of color and other materials to break that up was an important part of our approach. A couple of other views and some grayscale images to demonstrate what the massing and the articulation of the frontages is doing. I think the top image goes a long way to demonstrate what we were trying to do to make sure that this is more of an assembly of interesting and simple parts rather than a single mass, and tied together with the blue canopy elements that you see running along both frontages. The varying heights that we've introduced to address that aspect of the guidelines. You can see the higher slab elements at the corner. There's step parapets that run along, and also in terms of a perspective view of these buildings, the articulations, the recessed entries that you see marching along the east frontage there create, by their very nature, an in and out varied roof line along that parapet edge. This previous one, this is building A, so this is the main corner that you see when you're coming along Commercial Way, approaching the site. Building B, the point that we tried to make is, while there's obvious back of house areas here, we maintained the design language, the kit of parts wrapping around all sides of the buildings, so that any view that might be taken from around the site is consistent, rather than paring things down in the back of house locations. A little more to talk about in terms of the color palette, and stemming from our sourcing of conceptual natural materials. The photograph in the upper right, I think, does a good job to demonstrate the color range that we selected for use through the development. And the images on the left show that corner plaza and the main approach to the site from Commercial Way. There's elevations to demonstrate further how the various parts of the buildings come together in a variety of materials and colors, variety of the roof line. And if this is the landscape plan, I don't know if there's any specific questions related to that, or if our landscape architect would like to add anything to my discussion.
I'd just say that when we first were involved, starting on the project, making a site visit, we took notes as to what was happening on the various other developments for several reasons. One was continuity. One was to kind of get an idea of what kind of plant types were typically used or desired. And we tried to relate to all those different, I mean, there's such a varied amount of landscape styles, but we tried to create a kind of a harmonious planting with the others. The other was we do have the fortunate situation of having existing vegetation, forested areas to the west and to the north, and to my understanding is that's not going to be disturbed. So that acts as a really nice wraparound envelope to the project in both, you know, the plantings and the scale, how these buildings actually sit within that kind of a landscape, an instant landscape. Other than that, I think it's pretty obvious probably that we worked with the areas that we could and tried to take as much advantage of planting them. On the east, we were to try to create a connection to the developments to the east by both connecting them, but also we had the opportunity to have a fairly reasonable amount of tree cover for that asphalt parking lot, so we were pretty pleased with that. On the frontage, we were trying originally to connect with the building to the east, but apparently, from our notes anyway, some of the plants that were used were not necessarily bare, bare preferred, whatever. So we made some adjustments to our plantings once we got the list of plants that would be best not to use. But we still tried to create a nice canopy, understory of plants, enough so that you can see the development, but also have a nice upper level of planting. Took advantage of the corners to get some conifers in there to, you know, for the various reasons, but either to frame the site or to, in some cases we used it to screen some of the things you don't normally want to highlight, like the PMPs and any of the items that you normally want to screen. So we took advantage and did mass plantings of conifers there. And at the north end, against the face of the building, we also added conifers, even though we're not sure if that will be an impacted location. And then along the west, we kind of went to more of a native type tree type because of the forest. It could be that we have maybe more trees than maybe we need if the forest canopy encroaches over onto the site. But it's still something to start with, I think, that is compatible. There's a bike rack, and you know, we're open to discussions on any of the types. We just picked one that was less intrusive. It fit nicely into the space that we can. This is the one for general use, not the enclosed one. There's an opportunity on site to introduce some site furniture if that works out for the development. And then after we did the plan, we found out that, I guess we always anticipated the possibility, but we didn't have it until after the drawing was finished, and that was the city sidewalk. Right now, it doesn't continue to this location, but we did make provisions from the building through the landscape. We took it to the property line for now, but the idea was it would connect to the city sidewalk once that was determined, and that's what we were told. I think that's sort of an overview, and if you've had a chance to review the landscape, you'll have questions, comments.
Okay, that's it. So we usually start with a round of questions and then get into our comments. So I can start with questions. For the retaining wall on section BB on the north property. It shows an encroachment onto the neighboring property with the footing. Is that anticipated or?
No,
Okay.
it will not be.
Okay.
We will make sure that there's no encroachment onto the, we'll stay on our property.
Yeah, okay.
We can revise that detail if it does show that encroaching or revise that.
Yeah, it just on the civil one does show it going in.
Yeah.
And then related to the retaining wall, you have a retaining wall along the west side that is at the park to create the drive aisle around the west side there. And then there's a drop to the landscape area below. There's a setback from the retaining wall to your property line. So the shrubbery along there is at the lower elevation?
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What we have is there's secondary floodways abutting the west and the south. So we've had to have strict guidelines as to the sloping requirements there as we're adjacent to the flood, secondary flood.
Any rooftop use or access anticipated here?
We'll have rooftop access.
Access is required, but no inhabited area or for the tenants. It's more for mechanical access only, for maintenance.
Any consideration on a green roof or?
There hasn't been at this point, no.
And you're on the east side, where the parking strip is there, is that all curved, or do you have spillways into the landscape areas for stormwater?
Right now, it is curved. I don't think there was specific discussion, Al, correct me if I'm wrong, on water retention or lack thereof for spilling into the landscaping. I think that would easily be taken into consideration.
Yeah, right now we've retained it in the parking lot area. So we do have catch basins collecting all of the water there. So we don't have it spilling naturally into the landscaping area.
Okay, so no rain garden or anything like that? And fire truck access, I see the route through the middle between building A and B, and then on the west side, but you don't need, you talk to fire, and you don't need that front access on
Yeah,
building A.
from a building code perspective, it's what we've got shown is satisfactory for coverage of the building.
Okay. Last one is, was there any consideration on building A where most people will see on bay windows or doors to be opened up for frontage, or those are just glass curtain wall?
Right now, they're all shown consistently as sort of storefront assemblies,
Okay.
but if you look at the image that was just thrown up here, the glazing system that faces the cul-de-sac, I think, is an obvious location where a roll-up door, depending on tenant, of course,
Yeah.
could be incorporated.
Okay, that's my questions.
I'm just curious, is there a specific reason why you would not have the road circulate around the back of the buildings other than dead ends?
It was about density and efficiency of the site development. Really, there were certain pro forma targets from the owner group and directives that we had from the beginning to achieve certain goals, and it worked. And not having it loop around, I mean, we have it working without that, and so that pushed us in this direction for this form of development, for how the vehicles worked on the site.
Okay. It seems like there's enough room back there anyway. But, also, has there been a consideration at all with the landscaping and whatnot for a sitting area for the staff? Exterior?
Yes, the plaza in the lower right, in the southeast corner, was developed as an open paved area that is there for the use of pedestrians and building tenant users.
So that's why it's left open like that. I wasn't sure with the...
Yeah, I don't have I don't know if I can zoom in here. But, in that corner, there is a paved plaza for that very purpose.
That you'd have a picnic table or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, that was the furniture comment that Al made. Sorry, very slowly getting. There. So this was intended both in dealing with certain grade differentials between the street, sidewalk, and the paved area. You come in where this raised area and a certain amount of decorative retaining happening along here with this open plaza available for those uses. So that would be, they're not shown here, but it would be inhabited by street furniture or other items that facilitate that use.
And it's like 20 by 20 or something like that?
This is about, yeah, average, I would say 20 by 18 or so.
Thank you.
Was there any consideration given, I understand that you've answered the question regarding a road access on the north perimeter of the property, but for the west building, it would seem to me that because some of those units could be divided in half, that's a long way to go all the way around for somebody that was on the west side. Was there consideration about maybe putting a footpath for tenants there, like that would be on the northwest corner, but say didn't have access through the rear into that center courtyard?
It was talked about, it became a push and pull between provision of landscaping and provision of hardscaping that would facilitate that. I don't think, I mean, there's some grade considerations there, but I don't think there's anything that would prevent that from being accommodated.
Okay.
If that was found to be
It just seems like that would be a long way to
useful
go,
change.
like
Yeah.
dump a bag of garbage at the end of the day or something.
true.
The size of, I guess this is kind of probably one for the district or anything, but the size of the signage as it's shown in the renderings and the elevations here, is that compliant?
So during the development permit process, an applicant can apply with a comprehensive sign plan that does vary our sign bylaw.
Okay.
So it hasn't been
Okay.
against the sign bylaw at this time. But that's what they've submitted, and then when you go to council, we would compare that to the sign bylaw, and then they would make a final decision.
Okay. With the pedestrian amenity area, is the intention that there would be, the furniture would actually be built-in pieces or temporary?
We typically like to leave it up to the tenants with what they want to do, but we have been going, we don't have a problem with utilizing, putting in benches tied into the retaining walls that we have there. It's
Yeah.
definitely an idea. It just doesn't give you as much flexibility, not knowing what the tenants are going to be in terms of what they would like to have for the amenity space there.
Yeah.
Right, but I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think the intention would be, whatever the selection would be, whether built-in or not built into the retaining, for example, they would be fixed in place. They wouldn't be,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
plastic camping chairs or anything.
Okay. And was there any consideration also in that area of putting in like visitor bike racks? I understand you have the bike storage, but that.
There are visitor racks also located at the southeast corner of Building B, again, small, but
The only thing
in
with,
this location.
sorry, Chris.
Oh, okay.
The rack is shown on the last.
I didn't see that, yeah. Okay.
And the only reason why it might not work as well in the amenity area is that you do have stairs going up to there, so you would have to go all the way kind of around the entrance area there.
Yeah, no, sorry, I only saw the one over in.
Right, so
there's the-
there's the
southwest
secure-
corner, so that makes sense.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
the secure enclosure and then the temporary use rack here.
That's all the question.
Just a couple questions. Did you have a traffic consultant review the access with loading and parking constraints?
Not a specific report prepared, no.
I guess
it was more,
You could get one if you needed one.
yes.
Is there a materials board for this project?
We don't have a physical materials board here. Some selections need to be confirmed. There were some ongoing conversations with planning. So,
Is that a requirement?
It's not a requirement. We recommend it, but it's not a requirement.
The sign by law, I think that's probably, it would come in for another sign by law. Is it an application or is it being judged today?
You can provide comment on that too.
There's no other existing context that can be related to all these things. It's a new site, so there's nothing adjacent that would be measured to this, or what scale that would be adjacent.
Not immediately adjacent. I mean, there's some development further to the east on the flanking street, but nothing immediately to our east.
Great, thank you.
Sarah?
Can you tell me what the slope is coming off the sidewalk into the site towards building A?
That's it right there, Bridge.
Pardon me?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I got the civil ones here. So are you, sorry, can you just, you're talking
Yeah.
about just right in here?
Yeah.
So we don't actually have that grade, so it's 5.29 meters up to 5.85 meters over a distance of roughly, so that's about roughly 20 feet there. I'd have to double check this calculation to confirm what the slope is there. If you give me a couple minutes, I can do that for you.
Sure. Is there a step up to the amenities area from the parking at parking space 32?
It would be separated from the parking with a 6-inch curb. So it'd just be a one step up onto the amenity area.
And there is a letdown located at that corner of the amenity area.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay, that's all my questions.
No questions for me?
Would you be able to describe the canopy structure for the pedestrians?
Right now, that's a good one to use. So it's intended as a wrap. It'll be a steel stud wrapped in a metal finish. That's the intention for that. Bringing that additional color, that blue, that metallic blue, into the scheme.
Okay.
So the intention is that they're solid.
So it's the larger feature and then it just goes above
And
each entry?
correct. It around the corner, it's continuous around the main corner of
Yep.
the buildings, and it does a return wrap here, and it helps kind of tie all those elements together. Further down the frontage, it's limited to over the entryways.
Okay, thank you. And then site lighting, is there any lightings?
There is a lighting plan. It's not part of this presentation. I think it was distributed as part of these packages.
There's a copy of
This
this
one
one.
is. So I guess one of the comments was just about eliminating adjacent properties, is that being considered in the?
Well, the intention is always to have a full cutoff for any lighting on the site or on the buildings, so that there is no light trespass beyond the site itself.
Thank you for my question.
Jesse, in your report, there was a comment about concern about the east elevation. But isn't the east elevation the same as the west elevation? And is it of the building, of building B?
Is it the frontage? Sorry,
Yeah, so it's not the south elevations that you're concerned about, the ones that kind of face the street, but it's this one east elevation?
Yeah, so the south and the east elevations we're considering under development permit area 6A, so we're considering them under the business park development standard because the site is within both development permit area 6 and 6A.
Yeah.
The rear of the site interfaces more with lands that aren't anticipated to be developed and the rail yard. So we don't feel at this point, as staff think, that the facade of the east elevation is not quite at development permit area 6A guidelines.
And do you anticipate any need for a garter at the top of your retaining walls, or how are you dealing with fall issues?
We'll be looking at anything over 2 feet, obviously. If a guard is required, it'll be provided there. I think a detailed analysis, a final analysis of the elevation shown on the civil plan will demonstrate where that needs to occur.
Okay, that's my question, thanks.
Just for the materials, wondering about the color palette that you have
And then in relation to the renderings, on the renderings, it looks like there's 3 colors in the wood material. So is that correct? Are you?
Yes, yes.
Or the color palette maybe is referring to sidewalk and stuff? as
Yeah,
well,
there's
or-
additional,
okay.
it's not just the color palette of the buildings, there's paving material indicated there. So if we want to walk through it, there's natural concrete, the painted concrete is the darker tone. The board form concrete is limited to the landscape elements and the retaining walls.
Yeah.
The sockeye concrete is indicated, obviously, paving material.
Yeah.
And then down at the bottom, the blue, the pre-finished metal for there, and the flashing colors that are on the concrete in various locations.
And then for the wood that you're proposing on the south, the palette shows it sort of as a, I don't know, maybe it's like a panel of some sort, but then in the precedent images, you have a really lovely image of, the 2x2 strips,
Yeah.
which is a very different.
It is. The
architectural
image shown in the material palette here is not wonderfully representative of what we're intending there. And it is an open conversation that we've been having with planning in terms of the actual materiality of that, especially in the context of these being non-combustible buildings. And whether a natural wood finish is the right choice, it's the right starting point conceptually, but is it the right choice from a life cycle point of view and a weathering point of view? So I think a final decision on that with any input from the panel here would be made, and perhaps it's something that could be a stained or otherwise finished option and have that cast into the concrete perhaps. Perhaps it could be a wood-like finish that comes from a non-combustible wood product, a cementitious product perhaps. But finding the right solution for that is something we're working with the staff.
Okay. And then you have a surplus of 60 parking stalls, is that right?
Yes.
You've provided well above what you're required to.
Right, and that's mainly driven by leasability and market-driven decisions.
Okay. And what type of tenants do you anticipate?
Speak to that.
Yeah,
It's,
much like some of the tenants that you see in the adjacent newer developments in that area, so.
Really light industrial.
Light industrial.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a small, like a painting shop or somebody who's like a trade worker. It's very open to what it's going to be, but it's going to, the market is similar to what all the other buildings have with their small bay tenant spaces.
Okay, any outstanding questions or we can get through?
Just one, you said the retaining walls, landscape elements were board form concrete or the tilt pad?
board form is the intention, cast
Okay.
doors.
So different than the civil drawing shows for that detail?
So that would be specific just to that one along the amenity area there. That's where we really want to have that board form there.
So that's the only place there's board form is the amenity area, not the entire perimeter?
The front, everything on the front, on the south elevation we would, but we weren't anticipating doing that along the west and the north end.
It does continue up the east frontage for the extent of that retaining wall as it reduces in height on its way north.
High visual areas.
Okay. Any other question and comments? We'll go into comments. Can start. Regarding the east elevation there, it's nice the corner has the varying elevation of the building, but possibly, because that's high visual, along the length, the height could vary as well. It looks like it's just bumped higher on the corner and then straight across. Possibly consider an elevation change along that length.
Along the top of the retaining wall itself.
No, for the building itself.
Oh, the building, I see.
Yeah. You don't have a retaining wall along the east side, do you?
No, well, just at the corner, it reduces down as the
Right.
grade changes to nothing quite quickly.
Yeah.
But
I'm
anyway,
assuming that
you were talking
building
about the building.
along that lane. As well on that side, a continuous canopy for the sidewalk. I see it broken up. It might be nice, downtown is required to have coverage for pedestrians. And that could be good for pedestrians along there. For pavement, I anticipate that this is all asphalt pavement everywhere. You could consider varying that in the parking lot or the parking areas, maybe that's pervious pavers or some other treatment, not just a strip of asphalt, which the neighboring property that you kind of talked about, it's just pavement and a flat roof, and it's not very nice. We have wood elements there. I don't know what the overhang is, but you're going to want to extend that overhang quite a bit, otherwise it's going to be weathered and really quite ugly, and that's the visual side.
Yeah.
So,
We fully understand that is an ongoing conversation about the actual materiality and finish of that. And
Yeah.
if natural wood, then obviously other considerations come into play to make sure that it maintains itself.
right.
And whether that's an increased overhang or a change in materiality, that challenge is recognized.
Yeah, okay. That's my comments, thanks. Oh,
Sorry, I had a eye appointment, but I do have one question. On the back 209, 20991, are those single units or is there supposed to be a wall down there?
In Building B, the rear building, is that the one you're referring to? The intention is to provide for flexibility of leasing in that building, and that's why it's double fronted from a parking and loading perspective, so that if tenant demand was pushing for those smaller units, that building could accommodate that. So right now it's shown dotted.
But one owner would have a renter?
It might
Or would
be
he
the
put a
case.
wall down there and sell them separate?
They could potentially be individual smaller units.
any comments?
No, I'm good with that.
My comment is I think we've done well above and beyond on this. I mean, I really like it. I think my idea of industrial commercial is less expensive and highly functional. And so I would cut you all kinds of slack if it was only my decision and say let's keep it cheap for the sake of the tenants. On the functionality side, which is what I can speak to, I do suggest that road circulating around the back. Dead ends are problematic for big trucks, and you probably know why. And it looks like there's space back there to do it, although you would have to relocate your refuse bins to the sides, I guess, something like that. And in regard to that public pedestrian sitting area, I'm assuming it's paving stones or something like that on the ground, some kind of.
That's
So-
the intention.
So what will very likely happen there is it'll end up to be a bit of a snow pit, probably. And it would be really great if just in the landscaping somewhere else, there was a thought for a sitting area where it was just grass and a place where people can go and eat their lunch without sitting right next to the smokers. Because that's kind of bound to happen there, and you don't want to eat your lunch next to that typically. Just a suggestion, functionality on that side. You're gonna have lots of staff that are gonna want a place to go on a sunny day, and it's quite far to walk anywhere else that has green space. So, anyway, that's my comments.
Yeah, overall, I think the building looks really good. I like the palette use, I know we would finish, that's definitely, I would like highly encourage that this is an application where using like an artificial laminate type product would be a lot more it's gonna look good a lot longer because no matter what you put on that, within a couple of years, it's gonna be a maintenance nightmare, especially given that there's little overhang and the proximity to the sidewalk too, because a lot of it ends up being backsplash up off the ground. In terms of the east elevation, I think that the concerns that planning has about that could be addressed by trying to incorporate some wood, some of that wood finish around into that. I think overall the canopy with the wrap in it, I think does a great job of breaking up the mass and the verticality of it. So it seems to look very settled into its spot, but by wrapping that around, I think you would, even just in a couple of key spots, like where there's already the recess that's happening, would definitely make that look more considered. The signage, as you've placed it in here, with the large numbers, the sans serif font, it's really contemporary and bold. I think it'd be great to see that actually come to fruition with that next step. And given that too, because you've got, as it listed here, some very consistent formats for signage on there, I think having a pretty strict signage guideline that is incorporated in there just to maintain that look and feel, so that tenants aren't going rogue with that. I'd really like to see that amenities area, that it's actually like it's a kind of a contained, like it has benches maybe even on the parking lot side of it, so that it becomes like its own little courtyard. If it's just sort of left open, even with benches on the back side of the signage, it's like a deck without a railing. You're actually less likely to use it. It will encourage people to kind of congregate in there and make it more defined as a public space rather than just a parking spot. At the very least, I think that some sort of foot access around the back of that, in particular the west building, building B, to get to those refuse bins, especially in a torrential downpour too at the end of the day, and you've got bags and bags of things, that's going to be a long way to go around. And I think, yeah, that was all the comments that I had.
Great, it's a great project. I think it's well handled. I like the proportions that are used. It's certainly setting the stage, given that there's no adjacencies that you're working with right now, and it's kind of nice to see that you're going out of the gate with this type of project. It's sort of, obviously, the bar has been set. I think it's a good approach, certainly a good palette of materials and colors are being used. And I think with some refinement, it has its potential. I think the issue we've all been flirting around is the issue of durability for the project and what that means. And I'm sure you'll handle that. And I know there's appearing products in your materials say wood appearing, so I think that can be answered. There's stuff out there that will help you make the right decision. About durability for these types of projects, and given it's Squamish, it does have a slushy ground plane implication. And I think where this building might benefit from is how it meets the ground plane. Right now, the building just appears to spring up out of the ground, but a very durable concrete base or high durable material at the base would probably respond to the durability comment, perhaps, and give it a little more strength. I think in generally, the retaining wall perhaps is obviously going to be visible. It would need some sort of decorative approach or some sort of a confirmation to planning as to what that is, because that also will be visible from the adjacent properties. The project is in need of a transportation consultant, just given that along the loading trucks at the very end, I think, are probably not going to work, in my opinion, but it could be easily resolved by moving the garage or the garbage off of the middle and allowing some backup space for the loading trucks at the very middle ends. And then to move the garbage out of the way, wrapping it onto the side of the building would also allow you that sort of view and extension, and maybe respond to some of the things that John was talking about. I think one of the last comments probably would just be the signage, and I know what Sean's saying is it would be great to do signage like this. I actually enjoy the signage and the playfulness of it. I think it's actually really neat, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't conform to the sign bylaw based on size and stuff like that. So there might be a careful approach for planning to take this a step further, is perhaps, yeah, go with it, but if it were lit signage, and I can see a lot of neighbors complaining that it's just too bright and all that other business, so perhaps some discretion in and around it, but if we're asked to comment on it, that would be a comment. I think there is an opportunity for a sustainability approach to the project. If Squamish has any guidelines or requirements, it's probably good to ask for it. And you do have a large roof plane, and there's some opportunities there. And there's also some opportunities at the ground plane, being that if this is a pedestrian-oriented retail or commercial use, that there's a lot of grayscape on the project, that through some landscape design, there is some opportunity to maybe make it a little more Park Royal-esque, where you get a really strong, I think, successful mix of cars and people. And the ground plane could benefit from some decorative treatment. Again, I think we're setting the bar on this project, and it might be that's something that planning can move forward on. And then in regards to the planning request for comments on the building elevations, I think the internal elevations are just reading a little gray, and I think, just like Sean was saying, I think there is an opportunity to introduce a little more color, perhaps overhang or something, just to take away from that grayscape that also happens to have a retail door to it or a commercial door to it. So I think that the design is well talented and can handle those. So again, great project, and thank you.
Okay, my comments are around the accessible parking. I think there's some big distances to be traveled from where the existing locations are. I'd recommend maybe putting one space adjacent to the pedestrian amenity corner, so maybe combining 33 and 32. Potentially putting an accessible spot down at the end of building B, so there's not such a distance to travel. There should also be a connection between the sidewalks around the building, between building A and building B. So across from where the bike rack is. So curb cuts and a crosswalk there. And yeah, those are my primary comments. Yeah, that's all my comments.
I'd like to see a little more of what everyone has said, the successful kind of south elevation, the design elements of that put into the communal sign tower. Feels like a pretty standard tower, and I'm not sure, maybe it is, you're getting from a sign company, but I'd love to see a bit of, I don't know, something that suits the development a little bit more. And then I'm sure the lighting plan's a little preliminary, but definitely lighting on the corner sign and appropriate lighting on that. And I think that in general, the lighting plan could deal with another layer, more at the pedestrian scale, whether it's like a little, industrial looking sconce at every entrance door or something. I mean, it's really rainy and dark here 6 months of the year, and it is hard to navigate in the pouring rain in the dark, so just bringing it down to not the scale of the building, but down to the entrance doors, another layer of lighting, I think would And it can be down lighting, so you're not, but would go a long ways. I really like the signage on the south. I don't love it on the other elevations. I think that feels more typical block mall to me. And I wonder if it's because it's at the top kind of parapet. It could come down, or do you have another, hanging sign that's a little more, can be branded by the tenants, like their logo on a little hung center board or something, again, to tie into the individual light. I think then all the ones at the top could be white and the tenant's company name or something inconsistent. That might work, but yeah, right now I think the ones on the east and west elevations are too high that you wouldn't pick them up as a pedestrian, so you'd be walking around looking at where they are. I think the guardrail around the retaining wall is an important one to flush out early and try to keep either berm up the landscape enough so it's within 2 feet and you don't need a guardrail, you can deal with it with landscape, because as soon as you put a guardrail on top of a 1.5 meter to 2.5 meter high retaining wall in places, it really changes the elevation. So for planning, I'd make sure that's avoided. Yeah, the wood tone I think is a good reference. I think there's enough products out there to do it in a panel or a clip aluminum system and have it look good. So people are used to that now. I don't think it's going to be a stretch. I think either if you're not going to be able to accommodate the north full loop circulation, at least for visitors to have a dedicated turnaround stall at the end of the parking. You might lose 2 stalls or so, but I think otherwise people are going to be doing 6-point turns. Again, with such a small sidewalk, they're going to be backing like we see at backcountry brewing and stuff. If you can't, people trying to back out, they back pretty close to the storefront walls if they're having to go. So lose a couple stalls, but gain some turnaround space. I quite like the corner, the southeast corner, how it is, and not wrap like Richard suggested, just because I know it's not going to wrap very far and it'll look like a bit of a castle corner. So I like how you have 3 really strong elements there. And I like the east elevation, how the gray, you can see it as 3 elements clearly throughout the building, kind of chased. So I think that's good. Maybe the idea of, again, the doors could bring another color or the wood or something to then break it up at that lower level without fussing with the parapet. Maybe that's an easy one to not do square footage. Yeah, otherwise I think it's a well-reduced project, and that's hard to do in these tilt-up projects sometimes. So I think a few smaller levels of detail and design would go a long way to the next project visit. That's it for me.
Thanks. Overall, really great project, thank you. I echo the comments about the entry plaza, the pedestrian plaza. I think it would be great to design something rather than leave that to the tenants, because who knows what that will become. And with adjacent to that, on the front side of the wall, there's some conifer trees suggested, and I really appreciate the use of conifers on the site, but just be careful that they're not blocking the sign. I think we might run into issues as they get older, so maybe potential consideration for deciduous trees in that corner. Maybe the conifers could be relocated or such, but I'll let you take a look. But it seems like in the plan they might hinder the view of the sign. And I really like the use of the boulders. I think it adds a nice element, very Squamish element to the project. I would echo the comment with regards to the canopy. Given the rainy months, I think particularly the east frontage, the building A east frontage, it would be helpful to have a continuous canopy in consideration to the large bank of parking right beside that. So I think a lot of people are going to park there and then start walking all the way around the building to where they want to be. So that continuous canopy on that frontage would be really helpful for Squamish. And I think that the planting is very, very thoughtfully done. It's very diverse, and it definitely considers the local ecology and then also the robustness that's required for a site like this. In terms of sustainability, I think there's a little opportunity to consider pollinator plantings in the area. So it wouldn't need much, but a few trees that are pollinator trees, some shrubs, and maybe Knick-Knack as a ground cover. Just a few introduction of that would take the project a long way for sustainability. I think the west bank of trees would be a great spot for that as well. There's a lot of birch and maples along that edge, and there could be a potential to throw in some pollinator trees in there or elsewhere, but overall really successful. Yep.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of the comments of my previous panel members on, I think it's a really good package. It's very thoroughly done, with the exception of missing materials more than maybe a little bit more context, although the context is a bit thin anyways. But it's a very thorough package and very easy to understand, very comprehensive project. Staff's comments about the east elevation, I'm quite comfortable with all the elevations of the building. I wouldn't want to see a continuous canopy because I like the way the modules of this building break it up. So I think who's coming to this building is parking near where they're going. But on that note, parking, I think it's excessive. So I think there's an opportunity here to maybe reduce a little bit of that parking. Things like your snow storage could be reduced and create more green space, so you're going to get some more thawing and infiltration. Although I think you'll want that part of that snow storage for a hammerhead down the ends of those aisles. I kind of like the fact that the circulation doesn't go all the way around the building, because then it becomes just two buildings sitting in a sea of asphalt. So with that comes some circulation and functional issues, but you guys are going to sell a project, so you know what works and what doesn't. I like the idea that you've got some pedestrian circulation in there. I'm assuming that's a change in materials crossing the asphalt surfaces, so I would encourage that and maybe more of it. Let's see what else. I would encourage a little bit of work on in stormwater management. It looks like you're pretty traditional here. You're just sticking everything into a pipe, roof surfaces and parking surfaces. So maybe look at some breaks in that retaining wall where you can spill off to the wetland or the floodway to the west, and maybe look at just your stormwater management in a more modern way. I agree with the other members, the little pedestrian plaza needs to be animated and completed, otherwise you'll just end up with a couch there or something. The bike racks that are chosen, I cycle a fair amount. I like to bring my bike to where I'm going, so I think even if there was D-rings or something hung off the front of the buildings or something in front of shops, I'm not going to leave my bike way back there and walk all the way around this building. And on the selection of the bike rack, I'm not a fan of the ribbon rack because most bikes require a 2-point contact or they slide down and fall over. So it's a sexy looking rack, but I don't think it's a very functional rack. The wood material, I would support wood, but I'd go with a really rough wood that can handle that weather. I wouldn't support a foam or simulated wood. There's a lot of great product out there, so use a product that represents what it is. But I think in these elevations that really works for me. So, if it's a 15-year-old wood, it's just a wood screen, and you replace it 15 years. As long as it's not a fine grade wood that's going to show splash and so on. And then the guardrail requirements on the retaining wall somehow, I don't know if it's going to be thought about. I can just see it's going to be a pipe rail thing that's welded and stuck in place, and maybe you'll paint it to match parts of the building, but yeah, see if you can reduce the height of the guardrail and the retaining wall. But I think we're very supportive of the project.
Yeah, I think for a one-story industrial use, Philp, it's pretty hard to do too much width. I like the south elevation of the building, and I would like to see that language carried over onto the east. I think that's where it really falls apart for me. It doesn't speak to me about this is in Squamish, this is any different than any other industrial box, basically. I don't agree with the canopy being continuous. I think that would hurt that elevation. I think you do have awnings over the entries, and as Croswell said, people are going to park right in front of the building, so I think that's okay. But if you could articulate the light gray tilt-ups, maybe how you've done in the corner, and put some wood in there, that might help. I don't know, but you do the designer. I don't think the amenity space is usable. If you took out a couple parking stalls and made it a bit bigger, maybe if you ramp down slightly so it's not at the same level as the parking, I don't know, that might make it a bit nicer to sit at. Instead of essentially you're sitting in a parking lot eating lunch. And the color, the three colors, if you could add some more or some other colors on that east elevation, I think that would help get rid of that gray. And again, I agree with Rosalind on the wood material. I think use wood if you can. That's it.
Thanks. Just on to John's point on the roof around the backside. If I had a 5-ton truck coming in to deliver something for me, they pretty much have to back all the way in or all the way out.
Well, there's all the other loading bays, so you're gonna use another loading bay and turn around, assuming that they're all not full.
Yeah.
Or just hang it out.
Well, just to that point. And then if you wanted more of a neighborhood of stores, cover the canopy, because people are gonna be walking from one store down to visit their friend at the other store. And when we get our 1 month a year of snow, it's not gonna be very nice for those people who are going to, And then the sitting area, like covering it so that on the rainy days in the summer, people can still want to go out there and have their coffee and cigarette and donut. And I really like the pollinator trees.
May I?
Yeah.
In addressing Crosland's comment about bike parking, is because the sidewalk is not very wide, should you have D-rings in front of those buildings, it's going to be challenging to cross by. So maybe utilizing some of these bits of grass that come out, maybe or using a parking space to have some other bike racks located further down next to the parking lot.
Since there are 60 parking spaces over there, they could try to
They
use
could
another
use,
parking.
yeah, they could use. That's all. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Any more final comments? No? We're good. Okay. So we have 4 choices, as usual. ADP supports the project as presented, does not need to see the project adjourned. B, ADP supports the project as presented and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. C, ADP supports the project as presented and would like to resolve the following recommendations and return to the panel. Or D, ADP does not support the project. So, do I have
I'd
a
like to
motion?
make a motion for B.
Motion for B.
B is in Bob?
B is in Bob.
I'll second that.
Second by Shannon. For discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just want to vote.
Yeah. Okay, so let's vote. Motion for D. Favor, Dennis, not.
Can I just get who opposed that?
Yes. Okay. Should we follow review recommendations, or have you got a good sense?
I've got a pretty good sense,
Okay, great. Okay, so
unless Pal would like to hear it.
do we need to hear them again? No, okay. So B, it is. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, 5. Okay, let's reconvene for the next applicant here. It's development permit 473 at 39666 Government Road. Jonas?
If I can just put a quick plug for the VIP parking pass that I've handed out. So this parking pass works for anywhere around this district office off the street. So you can park in the laneway behind the office, and there's also a small empty lot on the other side of the laneway where you will see a bunch of district cars. So the pass gets you through, so you don't have to park in the 2-hour parking area if you don't want to. That's it.
And that parking is on the back side of the building?
On the back side of the building, yeah.
And is there any accessible staff parking?
I will have to check that. I suspect that we may be lacking on that, yeah. We'd be by the library as well.
Where's the brown bar?
Yeah, it might get you into some parties.
I guess it's free, isn't it?
Everywhere.
Starting at the chief?
It is free.
Okay, thanks. So, 39666 Government Road. Tenants, you're going to present?
I was just
Or-
going to say
Yeah,
just
yeah.
a few short words.
Yeah, perfect.
So yeah, this was previously brought to ADP at the December 14th, 2017 meeting. And so there's quite a number of comments that came out of that meeting. I've tried to focus on the most important ones in this report and how the applicant has addressed that, and Tanis is going to speak to that further. There was a few of the comments that were either focused on some of the internal design of the building as well as some zoning issues. So I tried to steer away from that and focus on the stuff that's more in line with the ADP's mandate and focusing on the design guidelines. So I'll leave it to Tanis to explain in detail what she's done to address your previous comments.
Can I just a quick question? The two packages that are here, which one is the, like, is there
So the smaller package is just to walk through the changes that have been done, part of the presentation. The larger package is the full package that you guys have seen previously. Okay. I just want to introduce Renee Olson. She's with the developer, sitting in on the meeting today. And Laura Lynn is conferenced in, the landscape architect is conferenced in again with us today.
And Laura Lynn, you are there?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Okay. So, we took your comments and we tried to make some sort of, you know, a list that we could address, and then break that out into what we've done. So there was 5 categories, and the first one was functionality. There was comments about the garbage room location in the parkade, access to the CRUs, loading to the CRUs, and there was some comment in regards to the elevator. So this page just shows all of those changes. What we've done is we've relocated the garbage room. It is now on the northeast corner of the project. Previously it was down here. This actually was a great change to the project. Now we have access right off the street for the garbage truck. They don't have to come into the parkade. It's, you know, still within the guidelines of the district sizing for that space. And you can see down here in the elevation, the oversized doors providing access from the street. So yeah, we think that was a great change. There was some changes on the main floor in regards to the square footage, so we actually didn't need to vary any more parking spaces. So we still are meeting the requirement with that move. So the improving the access to the CRUs, what we did was introduced overhead doors into each of the units. So previously it was just a man door with storefront glazing. Now those are large overhead doors on the north and east sides, which is, the frontages of these units. And you can see in the elevations, it's sort of animated the elevation. Previously the windows looked more in line with what was happening on the second story. And just an image here of what we envision that looking like. So these spaces are going to be, we anticipate the tenants to be more of a retail style, so we don't think that anything larger than a dolly with a few boxes are going to be put into these units. So, I mean, we're happy to, we think that the garage doors will meet that requirement. We don't need loading on the backside of the building. That's not what this project is geared towards. The second thing that the overhead doors have done for us is because we have that common courtyard in the middle, we can open up all of these spaces, whether it's a bike shop or a coffee shop, and it really animates that pedestrian area with the users who are shopping and people who are maybe just coming there to use the courtyard. So we think it's kind of it's a successful change to the project. And then just one sort of amenity that we were offering to the tenants in the residential levels is we've provided individual lockable storage units within the central core of the upper floor plans. So then the second point was around accessibility. So improving the ramp grade, looking at that relationship in the parquet between the accessible stalls and proximity to the elevator. So what we've done is we've moved the accessible stalls on both levels directly across from the elevator, and we've provided demarcation across the aisle and in front of the vestibule. And then the other comment was about the gradient of the accessible ramp from the street, and we've added a section of ramp and reduced the gradient on that. And then the third point was character at the pedestrian level. So there was discussions about enhancing how that lower level was, especially on the south and west sides of the building. There was discussions about pulling the brick through the project, adding, bringing some of that materiality through. And we decided that the Core 10 material, we wanted to utilize that as the material that we carried through, because we're using it in the columns on the 5th floor. It's happening on the planters around in the landscaping. And the brick was the material that we really wanted to focus on for the signage and the entry tower to act as a wayfinding material for the people, the residents specifically coming to the entry. Where is that? So we wanted the brick to kind of be a standalone material, and then that's why we've decided to go with the Core 10. So we've added planters on the main level. We've added Core 10 planters on the 5th level, and they'll be planted with grasses or ferns. And then we've added, there's an image here that speaks to what this may look like, some Core 10 panels framed along the exiting off of the back on the west elevation. The west elevation has also been recessed in for exiting. We think that kind of, previously it was just all one plane, so recessing that in a bit I think provides some coverage and also a bit of variation to that elevation. And then, so consider increasing the amount of glazing and enlarging the doors for the commercial space. So I spoke to that earlier. So the glazing component here has increased and provides that animation at the pedestrian scale. So context was one of the points that was discussed. And what we've done is shown essentially massing of what the adjacent properties could look like. We've seen and been in discussions with some of the adjacent properties architects, and so without showing those projects, we've just shown massing blocks of what could be built there, to give you a sense of how that ties into the scale of our building as well. So shows fairly well here. You can see the property on the west, which would be adjacent to the rail yard, would be potentially two buildings on that one site, and the frontage on Government Road is in line with ours. This is a building that would potentially be our project. We have a purchase agreement for this lot, so it would be of similar style and scale to this project. And then, of course, behind, all within the same zoning, so could be a similar scale of building. So the landscaping, the fifth story planting, previously we had trees, so we've changed that, as I mentioned, to some planters with grasses and ferns, and Laura Lynn can speak to that in a moment. And then we've added additional landscaping along the west. We've added larger trees and then a block of shrubbery, and then we've changed the design on the south. Previously that was just basically a sidewalk with some planting. We've made that sort of a animated sidewalk with some Corten planters, shrubs, and then trees. So we're sort of envisioning an image like this at the south. And then here are some renderings. I have a couple pages of renderings. This rendering show all of the trees, which do block out the building, I realize. So these relate to the landscaping plan, and then showing the massing blocks again with the adjacent projects. And then I'll just scroll through. This is the full package. We have this piece showing in a site plan image the adjacencies of the massing blocks of the potential projects, and then connectivity through to each of those areas. This zone was envisioned to be, you can share amenity space and that sort of thing. So we have this common courtyard happening here, and then ideally we would like to establish a connection through to this property and then through the back here, and then connection across the sidewalk from our plaza over to this plaza. And then the renderings without all the trees blocking the building. Yeah, so Laura Lynn, do you want to speak to any of the landscaping revisions?
Sure. I guess so the major change from the previous design to west side. There's a new flood route down the old side of the building. So where I previously had larger evergreen shrubs, we've added some trees, which I worked with the staff to make sure that this wouldn't impede any the flood issues, which is mostly they don't want stuff getting hung up as it slopes down there in the event of a flood. So I took out all the shrubs and we just got ornamental grasses and just some little kinnikinnick at the base of some of the grasses. for the bleak times of year. And then they didn't want any shrubs that would have branches to catch debris. They were okay with the single stem tree. I guess they figured debris that got cut up, caught on the stem would block to one side or the other, so that was okay. So I still was able to get some larger trees on there. And then across the south. And so we tried to create a better connection and a little bit more interest across the back here in anticipation of connecting it to other sites. So I think that this layout would work well depending on what happens in the neighboring sites. We can add some steps or a breakthrough at whichever point seems reasonable once we have an adjacent site to work with. The other change would be up on the upper level and they've showed trees up there before, but the tall grasses. And across the north side, we'll just use some large ferns, so some of the ferns that stand up a bit more upright. And all of this area would have irrigation, obviously, because it's going to be undercover, so not going to get much rain. And then in the portent planter so that it sort of speaks to the other aspects and as on our building. So I think that's the major changes to the landscape.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Laurelyn.
Okay.
Any last minute discussion on that? Let's do a round of questions, little comments. I'll start. Loading. It's a ramp up at 10%. Is there a flat area that they're going to park, or are they going to be loading off the 10% grade there?
You could access the plaza. This block is going to get pushed down a little bit, but they're just small cube trucks, so yeah, they would be loading off of. They would be parking in the ramp. There's
parking on the 10%.
Yeah.
And that area south there, that's walls and things, or is that level ground that they will drive on? Or?
This. You can see it in the rendering. So it's
trees,
planting and landscaping, so that can get shifted down the site. Yeah, so that the idea was that the ramp sort of ended where the entry column is for the tenants,
right,
for the residential floors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you just have single doors off the back for the west edge? Okay. You don't anticipate doing double doors or anything in there?
Or we anticipate all the loading of material, like I said earlier, maybe a dolly is going to happen through the front of the units.
That's all my questions. Go this direction, crossing, questions.
Okay, well, the same question about loading, so we allowed to have a loading bay that doesn't have a flat spot. You're allowed to have loading on 10%. Any concern about Corten, or plan for the breeding of Corten on the building or column bases and things like that?
Yeah, those columns are like in under a recess, so they will see a little bit of weathering, but I don't anticipate them to be bleeding off like they would in the landscape planters.
And those planters that are out at the edge of the building at level 5, would they bleed down the face of the building?
No, I don't think I don't anticipate that being a problem.
There's a catchment spray or something like that that sits under them. We worked that detail out later, but yeah, that's a good point. Any drainage will hit a tray and be directed away from dripping down the side of the building. Same with the ones that are in our landscape at the front. I think those ones will definitely sit so that the actual porcelain metal will sit in the landscape out on your concrete surfaces.
Is there a detail that shows how the columns meet the roof and the ground plane? I mean, right now it seems very diagrammatic, but how is that resolved?
Yeah, we haven't detailed that.
Laura Lynn, I guess you answered my question that I jotted down, why lawn on the west side, but can there be anything other than conventional lawn? Could it be a bioswale of sedges and other things that are more productive?
If, I mean, as the next building comes on too, I expect that area might tweak a little bit depending on where the other shops are on the adjacent building, but those could definitely have kind of little mini rain garden patches. Most of the plants that isn't lawn are ornamental grasses, so those will be great with other things like you mentioned, sedges, and they can stand in water quite well. So it's a good opportunity off slab to have some infiltration there.
Is it anticipated that the neighboring parcel would have a ramp parallel to this ramp, the loading ramp? So there'd be no screening, or it'd be double, we'll be looking at double ramps in that case.
Yeah, I think it would end up being a double ramp. We're not gonna put a retaining wall or anything in between the two. I mean, we haven't designed it yet, but that seems to be the most logical thing.
That's it for my question.
So, Laura Lynn, you had mentioned on the south area that there was corten planters, is that correct?
No, the south doesn't have any, just on the planting at the front of the building.
Oh, okay.
Quite a bit, as well as part of the sign.
Okay.
So I expect that corten will sort of drip into planting, so that you hide that, the coloration leaching off of that weathering seal. And same with along where it sits right over top of the entry to underground. I think there'll be kind of a little trough, it's called a little trough, that kind of collect and divert that leaching.
Thank you. And then at the north, the main entry of the building, it seems like there's a fall height concern. Is there a design for a guardrail in that area, particularly around where the corten is?
I think that the way, maybe in the rendering it's a little misleading. I see the edge of the corten would sort of see a bit of a railing in itself.
Okay.
And then the planting, we got a pretty wide planting bed there, but it would actually be down a bit. The shrubs that are in that will get large enough that you're going to see them over the edge of the corten. Okay. And then if we needed to have an extra railing or some nice details to add a bit of a corten post and rail type system.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Sorry, I might have been gapped out when I heard that. I think that's the same question I was about to ask. Is that the west property line guardrail?
Yeah.
Okay. And I heard the answer, I just didn't know if it was the same place.
On the west side?
The west, that's where I was trying, where there's the
On grid line 1, is that what you mean?
The walkway along the, not the west.
Yeah, there'll be a guardrail.
That would have a railing.
Yes.
Because what's showing now is about a 2.25 meter drop and then a 1 foot planter or so. So what sort of?
Yes, that planter's down low and there will be a railing all the way along that walkway. And then the planting is lower down the flood route. The grasses there get quite tall. I mean, some of them are taller than me. So I think it'll screen the wall nice, but there will be a railing for the people that walk above into those doors on the west side.
And that's undecided what that railing is yet? Is that correct?
I think it'll probably be an extension of what we have coming up the ramp, or by the ramp edge there. It just won't be lit. The ramp railings are going to be a lit tube metal.
And it might be just a depiction thing, but it looks like the neighboring buildings, when you're showing us context to the south and to the west, are down closer to street level, so they're down 2 meters. Is that correct? Like in the context sheet, it looks like the one goes to the south and the west are down at street.
Are down lower.
Yeah, is that correct?
Do you guys want to talk about that?
I think that they sit down at 5 meters. Our main plaza level is at 7.2 or something.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
is that
so-
a no-win
so-
or is that a question mark?
The people to the west will likely have a plaza like we have built, but there's a bit of a flood, there's a secondary floodway happening, so.
Between the two, so
Between the
running
two
along the
buildings,
west
yeah.
side lot line, there'd be either just lawn or a bioswale or whatnot between those two buildings for the secondary floodway purposes. And so that links into the choices of the plantings that they've chosen.
Okay.
So these are just massing blocks. I don't know what their finished grade will be.
I can speak to it slightly just because we've received those plans now. So the building to the west for sure is going to be a similar podium style with parquet or storage underneath to get that FCL that they need.
Okay.
CRU at the next level, probably over height, and then residential above.
Similar to this kind of?
To both the east and the west, it will be very similar.
Okay.
To the south, that's that mixed industrial portion of the MUD 1 zoning. And as far as I have heard, they're likely going to be asking for an FCL, site-specific exemption, to get the industrial bays at a lower level without the need to have that really high elevation to meet FCL. So they're likely going for an FCL, so they might actually be a bit lower, particularly around the building.
Great. That's it for questions.
Can you just tell me what color the doors are into the garbage room?
They'll probably be a dark gray steel.
And is that is it painted concrete or that's, because in the renderings,
Yeah, it's showing as a light gray. I anticipate that being a darker gray.
being a darker gray?
Yeah.
Okay, that's my question. Hey, Dwayne, here's your turn.
Has planning reviewed the setbacks relative to the east and west property lines adjacent, and also reviewed the potential massing for the adjacent buildings? And finally,
We have received the plans to the west, and I believe they're going right to their setbacks on both their government road frontage and then the shared lot line of this development. That
It's very
remains to be
early on in
seen.
the
Yeah.
application stage. We just literally received it a few days ago for the west side.
But they have the
And there
same-
isn't
the
an
same
application
setbacks.
on the east side yet.
Was there a code analysis done on the west facade of the project at all? At this time? Thank you.
In the changes where you have the storage lockers on the first level, I see it here, I don't know if this is just
This, This is on levels 3, 4, and 5 in the residential floors.
Yes, no, I know,
Okay.
but, I don't recall what that looked like before. Like what, I know that there was that extra width, but what was in that? Do you have?
So it was just noted as storage, so we've just defined that as individual storage.
Individual
Storage.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And then, I know that we brought up the consideration about the second elevator or increase in the size of the elevator. Has the size of the elevator changed? I know there's no second one in here, but
Nope.
it stayed the same?
Yeah.
Okay. And is there a
And-
reason for that?
If I may know, we have very limited ability to ask for internal features unless, you know, it's a rezoning application or something like that. This is at the DP stage. So when it comes to a second elevator, as long as the building meets code and it's all required under the code, that's as far as we can go.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to clarify what the correlation was, because they all seem to correlate from the recommendations to the applicant modifications, so did that just wind up there by happenstance? Okay. I think that's all my questions.
Yeah. The elevator would have been my first question. We identified some serious concerns over that, and it wasn't addressed at all, so. I guess when things go sideways, you'll be wondering why. My aspect is always about the functionality of the commercial and whether or not you're sincere about having a successful commercial element. And from what my understanding of the mud zone was, is this was based around a really nicely functional industrial commercial zone and residential is secondary. And I have a real problem seeing any sincerity in this commercial working. And that's from 20 years in the business. I have never seen anything that really fails as poorly as this. So my questions, I think they're pretty pointless because I'm not allowed to speak to the inside functionality of the building. So I'll just move along.
Yes. Is there any street parking in this area?
On-street parking?
Yeah. Is there street parking proposed for this, so there's no street parking?
No, the government road would be, the frontage improvements would have to meet our subdivision development control bylaw, which I suspect to have no parking on this section of government road.
Yeah, I can speak further to that. So it's going to be travel lane,
Yeah.
protected bike lane, sidewalk. That's what the order is.
Well, I was just, I was looking at the parking and wondering, with all those spaces there, where's everyone in the park that wants to go there? UAV, now the second floor, there's that big overhang. Is that supposed to keep the snow away from the doors? The overhang's 2 floors up.
It's a 5-foot recess, so it's fairly substantial.
Snow away from the doors.
Yep.
On the ground level, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, because, and then there's a walkway all down the west side, it's covered also like that. I just find snow is a lot more of a hassle than people think. And pretty much everything else was answered, but it's the floodway. And I guess in the mud zone, it's all supposed to connect. All the buildings in the back are all supposed to be designed so it all fits together.
There are density bonus provisions that facilitate people working together, especially on things like open space. It's not a requirement. But the intent of the MUD 1 zone was to keep it kind of flexible and experimental. But there are incentives to collaborate.
Has this building collaborated? This walkway in between?
Yeah, I mean, what we'll be seeking, Ted, is to get a public access right-of-way through the shared plaza connecting from Government Road to the southern property to make sure that there is that ability to keep that public and open and have anybody be able to traverse through there. So that's kind of where we're aiming.
And the last thing that I didn't hear, pollinator trees, so I'm going to say, is there pollinator trees? That's my new favorite word now.
Marla, did you hear that question
Yeah, wait till the
from
bear
Ted
people get
about
involved.
the
though. There'll be
pollinators?
no
Oh,
pollinator.
I know.
What was that?
Well, I'm just curious about pollinator trees.
Do you have any?
I can't, sorry, I couldn't hear the question. Can you speak up a little?
Pollinator trees, is the vegetation, does it have
Pollinator trees.
Pollinator plants?
I guess there are flowering trees on the north side of the building. The ginkgos use the male one, so I guess, yes, on the front, the dogwood.
Okay,
Yeah.
any other questions?
A quick one. So with the rejigging of the level 1 parkade, removing the garbage and recycling area, it's created this space in the southeast corner there. Is there any consideration of that being used creatively, productively, rather than just a dead zone?
Yeah, I mean, we can put bike parking in there, but you can see there's not, the access between the backs of two cars isn't great. But yeah, we will likely be using that space for something.
I had one more question. The building sections don't seem to be consistent with the elevations, and some elevations are showing exposed parking garage with building sections A and B show the parking garage fully
All right, yes.
buried
Here.
and level out the property line. So what?
Yeah, that's correct. That's an error. That was to address the secondary floodway.
Okay.
That didn't translate to the section, so apologies for that.
Okay, so questions? Round of comments? Start with my one comment, just making a flat zone for the loading. Whether that's moving that area down is probably the solution. The ramp can't be any steeper than that. That's my comment.
The building on its own, I find as an element kind of interesting what's going on, although the details are lacking, so I'm not really sure how it's getting pulled off. So I'm nervous that a lot of the elements that we see might not come to fruition because they might be too difficult, especially as it relates to a lot of the hotel use. Landscaping, I think, is quite interesting, although my comment about making the floodway a more meaningful landscape other than just grass, but make it a lattice well. I'm very nervous about the height of this building. It, all intents and purposes, is 6.5 stories tall to the west, and we have ginkgo trees, which are, in this environment don't grow particularly big, and then just grasses and shrubs. So I think it's a bit of an ugly neighbor, and it's set right at its setback, and if the neighbor's in that same situation, we've got a 6-meter canyon between these two buildings, which I find very difficult as the first one out of the block in the mud zone, and then perhaps the mud zone is rightly named because I'm not really clear what it is either. I think it's supposed to be a flexible zone that encourages a mixed use of commercial and residential, and I think this building needs to mix it vertically. Instead, we've got a layer cake, and we've got a layer of commercial, a layer of office, and 3 layers of residential. I'm not sure that that's the right way to mix it. and make it really a vibrant kind of industrial artist kind of community. I think was probably what the municipality was after in the first place. I find the program way too aggressive, and I think we made a lot of serious comments last time, and it's back to panel, and I'm not seeing a lot of changes. It's asking for variances because it's such an aggressive program. You know, it really has one story in my mind too much, and that's why it's having to go for setback variances and height variances. And parking, you know, yeah, we've got a whole bunch of motorbikes, but who's riding the motorbike today, right? Or who rode the motorbike today in the snow? So I think it's just pushing all the envelopes and not offering anything back to earn its variances. You know, John will talk about commercial, and you know, I'm not an expert in it, but I can see this commercial just dying, and how is it going to survive, and what's it going to turn into? Maybe they'll end up becoming artist lofts at some point, but and I won't bother getting any of the details on the project because I think at a conceptual level it's way off base.
Just some details about the design. I think that the paving on the south is bringing an interesting aesthetic, but I think the sawtooth from the very south is a little busy, and the sawtooth on the north of that zone is of a scale that's a bit more usable and would kind of be perceived a bit better as a space. The area to the south, the shrubs, I think, are just going to kind of overtake it, and you'll lose that articulation. In terms of sustainability, I think the plant list is very thoughtful, it's very beautiful, it's very aesthetic, but it has very little kind of ecological value, and I would encourage, while being very mindful of the list for the bears, being really thoughtful about some opportunities for pollinating plantings and ecologically rich plantings, particularly on that west edge. I think there's a lot of opportunity, which Crosland spoke about, with stormwater and such, and having a very robust plant list in that area. The ginkgos are a beautiful tree, but impossible to source, and I think not necessarily the right tree for that area, especially considering how another building is really going to be adjacent. But those are my comments.
I think some of the practical changes, especially the parking, are good to see, albeit those are ones maybe ADP we always comment on, we shouldn't as much. But it's nice to see them. I think the parking and the storage and stuff works. But from the exterior, I don't think any of the comments or concerns garnered much change. So, you know, I still have the same concerns. I like the precedent references for what this neighborhood materially and the kind of live work atmosphere kind of is. And I think even the ones in the new presentation book are good as well for landscape. I don't feel like I see those translated into the drawing set, the architectural drawing set. So I think maybe the intent is right, but I don't see enough clarity in the drawings to show that if we pass the project, we know that's what's going to happen. And I think some of the concerns or questions Dwayne's brought up with unprotected openings on a close property line could force you to change the elevations quite a bit. Maybe not, but it would have been nice to hear you had done a code review of that elevation and we can meet this much glazing, for instance. I think if you're going to have the east side yard as the kind of connection courtyard, like Asia described, and it's a huge asset to have that adjacent property under the same owners. I think the connection to the front stairs feels way too tight for me at the, basically above the ramp, the parking door. Looks like there's a couple meter kind of angle cut where you have to skirt by the corner of the building to get to this corridor. And to me, that there's almost like an attitude that's been applied to the building where it just feels too tight everywhere, and that's on the west property line too. I feel it's just unfortunate. It makes all those residential units have small windows facing the side yard, when if that just had a bigger setback or a courtyard or something, I think it would help the landscape, it'd probably help the floodway, it'd probably help a lot of things. Yeah, I think overall I'm challenged with the revisions. We're still looking at a building that has a variance. I still wouldn't support the height variance. I think the only reason we should have a height variance is if there's something significant we're getting back or there's a significant hardship. So I wouldn't support that. I'd still like to see some major revisions in the mass and the scale and the kind of proportions of the building.
My comment would be just to make sure that there's going to be some contrast when you have elevation changes, so between your landings and the ramping at the front, as well as at the top of the loading zone, so that there's a visual cue that it's going to be going down. That's all my comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the project definitely has a challenge, and I think the architect has done an excellent job at taking the parameters from what they see in the site and what's given to them by planning. And I do like the building for what it is. I think the building it needs a further study around the openings and the proportion of windows. The windows want to be bigger. There's a lot of wall area and mass area there. I have to defer it back to planning because I think, given the principles as a building, it's an architectural response, and I get it, and I commend the architect for doing it and dealing with the fenestrations thinking about the building for what it is and how it fits. It's just to be blunt, it's too pushed because it's fitting in to a box and a parameter. A 3-meter setback on it's no question a 5.5-story building, but it's really a 6-story building. And 3 meters is not livable for windows on a side yard. It's nothing I think that could respond to. So if the vision here on this project is that the planning is supportive of our project with a 3-meter setback with this building height, I think planning needs to go back and we look at the guidelines and understand how this building is actually going to fit the site. So it's too big, it's too pushed, and it's too wide. And I think, again, if the planning guidelines were set out to respond to this type of size of building, I think the architect would be sailing through design. Otherwise, if the study, if it's allowed to continue, I would focus on window proportion. I would focus on the columns and perhaps add a little more detail and color if you've done. I think it's a very eye-catching expression. And I do like the color palette, and I like its street presence. But I think there's just larger issues for this project.
Yeah, overall, I like the palette of it too. I think it speaks to this area. One of the things I actually found most alarming about this was that there isn't going to be any street parking available, because I didn't get that out of the last meeting, which is concerning to me for the commercial, because it's one thing, like I understand that it's been provided in underground, but like I know myself as I'm not going to go park in an underground parking lot when I want to go and just like run in and grab a coffee, or I want to go and just do a quick errand. I'll go in if I'm at Pacific Center, I'll park there when I know that I'm there for numerous things. But the idea that this isn't, it's central in the north-south of Squamish, but it's not in terms of where the core of the residential is. So it is still likely something to be a destination where people are getting in their cars to go and drive to use those commercial tenants that are in there. So I don't know if there's any sort of, I don't know if there's any solution to that, but I'm just saying that is a concern. I also had a question about with the limiting distance, with the 3-meter setback, like on that west elevation, if there is another building with a 3-meter setback, what's going to happen with the glazing?
Both of the
That's-
buildings will meet code.
Well, and I think that's the point that others have made on the panel as well. There's a lot of concern around that limiting distance issue.
So, but is it currently maxed out?
conforms. No, it currently conforms.
It does, okay. Because I think that actually, the ability to increase the glazing on the building would do a lot to help break up the mass of it. This big block is to actually give it some lightness, not only from experiencing on the inside, but even visually from the outside. I think adding the garage doors was a good solution on there too. It would help to hopefully activate that space, like kind of Granville Island style in the summer months. But I do still have concerns about the height and the massing of this in the context of where is this going, and is it going to end up being caverns beside these buildings in this area? Those are my comments.
Well, I can't get past the fact that this is our first stab at mud zoning, and this isn't anywhere close to what I think we were all discussing and thinking. And I just we're not even allowed to speak to some of the issues that we see. Yes, it's an experimental zoning, that means we should be able to weigh in, and I think that a lot of the comments that we gave in our first go of this were actually basically free consulting to identify future issues, and it appears to me that they weren't even considered, and here we are looking at the same thing again. That's going to have the same reasons for failure, and it's going to fail internally. Not only that, but in the grouping of buildings that happen over there. If we see a bunch of these occurring in that zoning, that's just my opinion, but I don't even know what to say at this point. I'm not allowed to speak to the real issues here. I think that some of my colleagues have actually been a lot more articulate than I can be when I'm getting a little bit emotional about these things, because I've had a lot of investment in the development of the mud zoning, even so far as back to the days of the first days when we saw the Alta Lake Electric building come up. And I think this was supposed to be more or less like a jumbo version of that concept, but we're not there at all. We've got a box for residential with some token commercial at the bottom. I don't know what to say. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, thanks. So on the wall, this needs to be engineered for the window openings. If that changed dramatically, will this come back to ADP anyway? Need code analysis to determine how many openings on that, the east side, the west side?
Do you want me to listen?
Sure.
So when a DP, if and when a DP is approved, and then there's changes at the building permit stage, for code, sometimes we've had issues in the past where the materials that we use have been approved by fire consultants. They're too exposed to risk, and we have to change the materials. Basically, it's been to date a discretion on if the change is significant or not, and if it's significant, then it actually warrants going back to council, and if not, then it stays at the staff level, and generally we have our general manager, we explain the change, and then our general manager signs off on it. So, do you want to add?
Yeah, if it was a major
That's-
change, then it'd go back to council, in which case it'd probably come back to ADP for another review. It would be an amendment to the DP. At this point, we're assuming the building has been designed to code, and then the applicants take on the risk that if they haven't designed it to code, it potentially will send it back to an amendment stage of the DP.
And would council get some kind of comment from planning on how the mud zone's working?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had an application yet come forward
Yeah.
to council, so it's hard to say how it's working, right? There's 5 properties, all of them are of different size. All of them are gonna produce a different product. And that's the experimental nature of the zone.
Yeah, I kind of thought that they were all supposed to tie together, and I know there's a few block lots there, so.
Okay, any other comments from this? Okay. Let's vote. 4. I'll read them off. ADP supports the project as presented, does not need to see the project returned. B, ADP supports the project and would like the applicant's work with Scott to resolve the following recommendations. C, ADP supports the project as presented, would like the applicant to resolve the following recommendations and return to ADP. Or D, ADP does not support the project. So do I have a motion for A, B, C, or D? Or do you want to discuss this? Discuss this? Contentious? Sure.
Well, since we picked C last time, and I think something's happened again in transcribing these motions, because originally, or a while back, we changed all these motions from supports the project as presented, and each one of them says as presented, so no, we're not supporting as presented, we're supporting it in general, other than the A, because if it's supporting as presented, it's accepting it the way it is. So somehow that language has got reverted back to what it was a couple of years ago. So that presented should be in general for the last 3 items. Or actually item B and C. But anyhow, for this application, last time we selected C. So as this panel has said, we support the project in general and wanted a number of things addressed. So just as a discussion, I don't think we can go further back than that. We don't have to pick A, B, or C because we didn't pick D last time. Just for discussion.
So they made an attempt to follow our recommendations and say why they made those changes, and what those changes were. But there was nothing about the size and the width and the actual size of the building.
Yeah, I think if we look at the things we should be focusing on as a panel is the exterior appearance, the volume in relation to context. I don't think there's been any significant changes from when we chose C last time. At least that was my thought of the first time it came, is that the practical stuff are always kind of good free advice, as you say, or comments, and maybe we delve too deep. But I think the overarching impression, yeah, it would have been great to see one major gesture to the height of the roof or the massing on the side yard or something. Because from my side, like as an architect, we have, yes, you have a mandated setback, but we know projects we've seen that build to the full lot line setback all the way around versus ones that, you know, go to the setback where needed, but also provide relief to provide proportioned buildings or light or, I don't know. And I still feel like I don't think you can throw this back on the zoning kind of planning side. I think it's experimental and that's a good thing, but when I see a maximized project with variances and challenges in landscape and public space, I have troubles.
Can I speak to that,
Yeah.
Chris? So the variance for the setback is only in the parkade under the plaza. And it's a 6-inch variance. And that's to make sure that we're meeting all of the length and aisle widths in the parkade. Because this is, to get a parkade working, this property was just a bit too narrow. And then the only, above the parkade level, the only other places that are tight to the setback is the corner, the lower corner of the southwest corner. So the rest of the project is set back from the setbacks. The plaza, the north side is almost 6 meters.
Yeah, the height was
So-
a big one for me, and parking comes from
Okay.
square footage, right? Number of units and square footage. So if we're trying to fit that parking in a parkade, it's tied to your square footage you're trying to fit on the property.
Yeah, I'm just talking length, aisle width.
Then maybe
I can
speak to the
provide
height
a
variance.
little, I can provide a little bit of background on the height.
Sure.
So they are meeting the maximum height requirement for the top of the upper story ceiling. And so it's the butterfly or the cantilevering portion of the roof that is the variance portion. And staff were supportive of that because we think that's what provides a lot of that upper level interest to the building versus a flat roof. And then that cantilever portion, I think, is about 1 meter difference over the maximum height. And it's actually the brick feature wall that goes to 1.69. So that's that extra bit of height is specifically for that small projection of the brick feature wall. So we thought that it wasn't too
As a pedestrian standing at the
dramatically.
feet, looking at that cantilevered up, it's going to appear that much higher.
I agree with the character of it's the character of the building, right? The columns and the butterfly roof. I appreciate that and like it. I think it's good. I'm just challenged when we're maxing out, or what feels like a very, very dense building in a dense neighborhood, and we're going even more, trying to reflect some comments from other people that if there was just a bit of breathing room, an eighth less floor area, maybe we could fit those things in. I know it's a really hard zone, and there's a lot that we don't see in drawings that forces these things, especially floodways. We don't know too well, so I recognize the challenges.
What are the guidelines for the zoning that have been approved?
Civil zoning, we can.
The DP guidelines? Yeah, so that's the other challenge on this project is that the guidelines are extremely outdated. They're the Squamish Industrial Business Park guidelines that we're working under for this area. So until the new OCP is adopted, which brings in significantly better those universal guidelines and kind of those best practices that would apply to this area. I think there's only 6 guidelines, or it's this is what we're actually looking for.
I don't think the materials or anything people have a problem with, or was there in general?
No.
I think it's more it seems to be the site plan and the scale and some of the sectional.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's detailed things, and then the stuff we can't talk about is whether, we'll be successful. That's not this panel's position or so. We're not here to decide whether something is going to be successful from a commercial perspective.
I would hope we could speak to the functionality for the longevity of our citizens that have to live in the building after they bought. I would hope that we can speak to that. I'm not sure.
We can speak to that. It's just the challenge is if it keeps coming back, the project keeps coming back to ADP for those reasons that are, beyond the design guidelines, which is this is a DP stage. There's more flexibility at a rezoning stage, but this is DP stage. So, we can speak to that as long as we're not holding back the project because of those reasons.
Well, I guess at a DP stage, if this was a rezoning, there's kind of rezoning level of information here, but at a DP stage, I would expect to see a confirmation that the limiting distances are satisfied, and that building details, planters sitting on edges of buildings, how they are drained, how columns meet the ground, how they meet the roof. There's a level of detail that's not DP in my opinion in this package that prove out the fact that you can pull off the kind of really nice architectural elements that we're being given in step format.
And I think what we're being told, though, is that in an industrial zoning, where the planning is allowing a residential, industrial, commercial zoning to happen in an existing industrial zone with the same setbacks and the same parameters that are here. And I would say that the architect's done an excellent job of meeting those parameters to some degree, but the planning principles need to be studied and revised in order for an application of this size and volume to move forward.
I was one when this zoning got structured to argue for more flexibility, to allow designers to then work within less prescriptive, right? So we get more variety. So that's where my comment of, we have a 3-meter setback, there's no reason why the residential needs to be 3 meters. Commercial, we can get what we need out of it. Parking, sure, great. It allows you to have your parkade close to the PLs. Footings, things like that, to deal with the floodway, I think is a good thing. But doesn't mean, and then that's where I look at the precedents are great. They're boxes too. Maybe not 6 stories, and 6-story precedent might help us visualize.
I like the idea of the flexibility, but I think there needs to be, it needs to be said, perhaps it's 3 meters, but you must have an undulating facade if those things get into it. The panel is then responsible for reviewing or critiquing, is it enough? And speaking from experience, a 3 meter plus another 3 meters or another 4 meters on a 6-story building, let's just say for the argument they're allowed to do 6 meters between buildings, because that's what the zoning is saying. And let's call it a 5.5 story, let's round up and call it a 6, because maybe there's a high manipulation. Other than perhaps downtown Vancouver, Yaletown existing building conditions, that has no livability at all on a long facade building. So I question the guidelines, perhaps, as to what the setback should be, because the building and the architecture is just responding to them, granted. But at the end of the day, I think the product that one has to live in is I think we're talking about livability.
But if we're talking about flexibility, those setbacks aren't 1-2 lines. Those are the maximum or minimum setback. Right? So you don't have to go to them with the residential component or other components.
You could have your balcony to that 3 meter, right? And then have a 4 meter balcony setback to give you the separation, which we see in lots of projects. Because the other argument for the density is look at like a laneway in a more urban city that's 22 feet or maybe 25. We're not too far off that. So it feels cavernous for Squamish because we don't really have an urban condition. We're creating one, but I think there could be a couple more gestures to soften that density.
The 5th story is set back the entire way around as well, so it's only the 2 levels of residential.
Let's,
just
for discussion, I think some of the comments is it's a big building. So does the building need to be this wide? I'm asking the question. In my opinion, the building does not need to be this wide. We have a double loaded corridor. We could lose 7 plus a quarter plus 4. We could lose easily 12 feet out of the width of the building by making a decision, an architectural building form massing decision. So I think, what are we endorsing? Are we endorsing the guidelines and the setbacks? Or are we endorsing the architectural building? That's probably the application.
I'm just curious, if not at DP, where does our zoning allow us to address functionality issues and ensure decent functionality in any building in Squamish for the ongoing use of people once they go off from the developer?
That'll rezoning stage.
Only rezoning?
Yeah, at this point, the setback variance is only for the parkade, right? So that'd be really challenged to hold back the project on something that it meets the zoning. We can revisit the mud zoning and, we can do that, but we can't hold back an application because it's meeting the standard that's been set out. And the other thing I should say is, Asia mentioned that the guidelines, there's very few guidelines that are coming, but they're not here yet. So the panel, I think, really needs to think about how much detail has been provided and whether that detail, the extra detail that the panel wants to see, is that captured in the guidelines. I suspect that it isn't. So it's not a perfect zone. It was an experiment. We drafted it very quickly. It was actually a residential area that's turned into a mixed-use area. We had like low-density residential zoning in place And with all the development potential in town, we had a subdivision application put forward. And so the district jumped and rezoned it to something that was palatable to both the property owners in the area because there was a strong lobby, as well as would achieve some employment and kind of tie into the business part. But to start, it was a residential area.
What's involved in, again, I understand the adopting the new OCP and that, but what's involved in putting an amendment or something into the MUD zoning in regards to like increased setbacks for floors above the first two floors or above commercial, that at that point, just because if you have this block here, versus having it stepped back, if everybody has to have them stepped back, then you're greatly opening up the amount of light that's coming into it. I understand that where this project is coming into right now is that's not, that it can't be governed by that, but I think, like myself personally, if we knew that was something that could be addressed, given that there's these murky guidelines going on with this MUD zoning, that so then the next building that comes in next door to it, that can be put in place, so that basically this building gets to be the precedent, it gets to be the block, it gets to have the setbacks the way that they exist now, but knowing that future buildings are going to have to accommodate that going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely something we can look at. The question is always the resources that we have to dispose at problems, and we have a lot of land use problems around the district. The zoning bylaw and the deep area guidelines are quite archaic. The zoning is really not aligned well in some areas with the OCP and the community vision. So we're always juggling the priorities and where there's a lot of growth potential and where the zoning doesn't align with the OCP. And this is one of those areas that we could look at changing the zoning before we do the general zoning bylaw update, which is going to follow the OCP adoption.
I would love to see a floor area ratio dictate the density on a site rather than the envelope, because it just seems this is typical of so many buildings in town that are just maxing the envelope, vertically and everything, and filling it up. Whereas I'm personally not afraid of height. I would give it more height and say you're limited to this much floor area ratio on the site, and have some articulation in the height of the building rather than just building a big cube. And we might end up with a lot of other projects out there, that kind of flexibility, but that's kind of beyond this specific.
So we've got an application before us here, we should probably deal with it.
I think it's important, I don't know how you guys feel about what I had just said and what John did, but it's important for us to feel comfortable, I think, doing something with this now is knowing that we've identified a problem and knowing that there is a route to which this problem, this hole can be addressed for future projects going in. Not that if we approve this is setting a precedent and then that's it. Everybody else is going to be able to do.
This is one way of interpreting the MUD 1 bylaws, right? I think they're very prescriptive, but they're also allow for a lot of variety, and I think we're going to see that. And I know firsthand, I'm a bit biased because I'm working on one of the properties, but yeah, you can slice it any different way from different architects or different performers. We're going to see different things. Some people like height, some people want to see it step back. I fight that one all the time. It's a personal constraint for me as an architect, so it's hard, but I think what we as a panel should be commenting on is how an architect has executed their interpretation of the bylaws. And I don't think it's outside of our scope to say, it's too far this way or it's too far that way, or you're taking advantage of this to get this.
We have a separate meeting for that type of topic. Yeah, of course.
Sounds like we'll see the next one coming for MUD 1, next project, or these?
Yes, the next project is going to come quickly because it's at DP stage and it proposes all rental housing, which means it goes into an expedited process.
Yeah, or encourage everyone to read the MUN 1 zoning. I think it's great because it offers incentives for density for rental housing, energy performance, cross lot line connections. There's some good intents out of it, but you're going to see the first one, and it's the first one. So
We better vote, we better.
Need a motion.
Yeah, okay.
see,
Motion for C, ADB supports projects in general, and applicant to resolve the following recommendation and return ADB. So, seconded.
I'll second it for discussion.
Seconded for discussion.
I think I'll second the discussion.
Seconded for discussion.
Well, I guess for discussion purposes, I would say at an ED level, I would like to see a level of resolution to this person, like the building in details, to make sure that it's actually suitable. The architects were given the guidelines and the laws in general, with the minor variances. So, everybody, it isn't a work two line, but we can work within it. And we have to judge it based on what's before us.
Okay. Let's vote.
I somewhat agree. Just a short discussion, I guess, from this, just my comment on that is, it's got everything. It's got everything that a client wants, and it's fitting within a box. And I agree with Chris's comment that we get shoved in the boxes so much. And this one's taking the box right to the limit, right? And there's an opportunity, and I think that's why C is a good resolution, because it's allowing the applicant to go back, take these comments to heart, and prove to us that livability, and there's City of Vancouver diagrams as to how livability works. Prove to us that this is functional in some other way, right? And I think that's probably the comments that could come from this panel to allow it to come back and perhaps be more favorable. And then a message behind it is I do think planning should sort of look at what they're getting as a product and what they're getting as a in this case that went out of the gate and measure some of these comments, I guess, so that either A, they get into more guidelines like you're talking about, or they be ignored and we can sit here and we can all be subjective as to is it livable or not. So I think in order for it to continue, it needs a little bit of more proof in the pudding. It needs someone to say this is livable because, and here's a diagram. The height works, and the windows have to be this size because energy's telling me this. But we need a little bit more meat to it, I think, and then it'll allow us to probably make it approvable. So I think probably is correct. I think C is probably the right way to look at it, and allowing the flexibility to allow the designer and the applicant to bring forward. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. That discussion, let's vote for the motion, which is C. So, just vote for that. Everyone, opposed?
Got that too?
Yeah.
And I just want to insert a shameless plug for adding on to this discussion. We're still at first reading for the OCP DPA guidelines, the universal guidelines, and I know my coworkers Matt and Sarah have been to see you guys a few times and they've emailed them out to you. From what Matt's told me, we didn't get a huge overwhelming response from the AET members on that, so this might be a good opportunity as a final push before we bring the second reading and the public hearing forward, is that we still have time to make changes to those DP guidelines, but that time is like within the next week or so. So if you do have a chance to look at that with these new perspectives that we brought forward, it's really appreciated.
It would be valuable too to know like where there will be public parking that if you're over height, you can't get into that garage where you would park for this group of,
Yeah,
like whether or not
I
you're
can
gonna be
definitely
able to
talk
like
about the
Heritage Railway
on-street.
Park or.
I can talk about the on-street parking and then.
Yeah, is there any flexibility to that, or is there like, is it outside of Squamish given the proximity to the rail yards and that?
No, it's still our road right of way with, there might be some regulations for proximity, but I think that it's just given the width, we wanted to see the protected bike lanes go in there to try to promote that active transportation, and because it's coming off of the government road bike lane, very close by. I guess the other opportunity is that the development to the west, they have to not build adjacent to the rail yard, and they are going to provide surface parking for their development. So I could see, like that's quite close by to this property, I could see this development benefiting from the surface parking that's going to be provided for the adjacent development.
Yeah, even if it was like, there was access to 3 or 4 stalls that were like limited to 1 hour parking kind of thing, that could be huge for the commercial in here to be able to have that turnover and.
It's hard to do overlap of the public sidewalks and how many drive paths you have across that sidewalk. Where that's a really weird intersection already at Queens, and so it gets complicated fast. I always find precedents for these neighborhoods really helpful. Like in my head, I've always heard of lots of cities that have done these mixed-use, dense, 4 to 6 story neighborhoods, and they're great neighborhoods. So yeah, I'm really excited about this neighborhood. I just think it's a challenging one to see one project at a time. They're all going to be coming fairly soon.
Is there any, in this particular area, is there any district-owned land there that there could be like potential even short-term parking use on there for like, and just see if there ends up being, 5 or 6 buildings of this size that go up very rapidly, and there's virtually no street parking, and it all ends up going underground, like that could make a huge difference in the livability and functionality of the neighborhood, of having some additional.
I think there's on-street along Queens now, and I'm not sure because of that, once you get further north into this neighborhood, it's still the old like ditch and it's something to talk about.
I always think about Arbutus Walk in Vancouver is a good one for similar density, just like Arbutus and 12th or 10th and Broadway. And that whole neighborhood was, instead of building towers like everywhere else, flip them on their side and get 4 to 6 story buildings. And it's all internal parkways and plazas and only underground parking or the street to the outside. And it's a really successful neighborhood. Not as much commercial.
But meaningful open space.
Yeah, not maxed out. I don't know what the guidelines were for that neighborhood, but I bet they could have built denser. We got a height bonus to give the park down the middle. So I think there's lots of things we can look at to see projects that aren't maximized.
Is there an ability to require that subsequent applications coming into adjacent properties like have to give consideration to what is going on in that neighboring property? Like just thinking, for example, with this building, having the outdoor public space courtyard already on that east side, rather than, building 5 stories straight up, 3 feet off the property line or 3 meters off the property line. If there was a encouragement that they also incorporate courtyard on that side of the building, that could double that amount of space and end up being a large kind of entrance to draw people into the core of this whole area of buildings.
I don't think you can legislate that. I think it's good
Well,
design.
yeah,
It would be,
No,
yeah.
The
but-
zone does allow to share open space to encourage what you were describing.
Okay.
Like it is being shared between this property and the one to the west, that plaza space is shared between the two.
To the east?
Yeah. Of this,
Kind of the great
the
block.
plaza area
But not to
is
the south.
shared between.
Oh,
the
yes,
two.
yes,
Different
yes, yeah,
level.
yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to to see it develop incrementally, but it almost needs a comprehensive development strategy on how it will unfold. Otherwise, it's going to be application after application. And sometimes it's not work, right?
It's quite different in here because of the flood height. It's different than any other neighborhood I've worked in. It really changes what your public ground plane can be. So this project is doing a podium and deals with ramps, and you see the parkade stick out. The next one that's coming might be totally different, and that creates these challenges of the side yards, and they're tighter. They're not 25-foot side yards. Okay, they're 10. So.
Okay.
Well, also, the adjoining lots, as far as I know, they all access from Pioneer Way.
The ones to the south do.
Yeah.
Well,
And so there's no access.
I think there's access to the north end, or the one against the rails.
I don't think that one's allowed to go out through that way because it's too close to the railroad. So it's all coming in this backside.
I think it is allowed as long as it has an alternative access point.
I think right out, right in.
But my understanding of the mud zone was that because of these two are so close to that intersection, this one and the adjoining one, that there was going to be some kind of courtyard in the center. And the vision that I all saw for that mud zone was coming off Pioneer Way to a central hub that can service the ball. That's what I remember of it.
So the way that was, or there's an incentive for that, and that's you could build to a zero side lot line. So you could put a building across property lines, essentially. And then the idea for that was, yes, then you could have one entrance in, and you could build the rest of the site out. But there is no requirement. Again, what we heard from the stakeholders when we went through the zoning process is flexibility, 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 and that's what we did. We secured a minimum amount of employment space. We density bonus the residential on the more employment space you do, the more residential you can have, compiled with rental, purpose-built rental, and that was it. There's very little controls. The 3 meter setback, when I compare that to downtown, it's 1.5 meters between the buildings. So it's twice that size. And it is an experiment. I think it's a real challenge for the applicants when they're meeting that side setback standard to be asked to explore something else, because that's not what's in the zoning, that's not what's in the DP area guidelines.
Well, in fact, we've been compliant.
Yeah.
Throughout. So, and so the fact that the zoning is as it is, and that there's a misunderstanding is, to say the least, frustrating for us, because we're coming in good faith, obviously want to buy more property in Squamish, believe in it, believe in the energy that's happening here, believe in I was out most of the day talking to the folks that live here. I understand that there is an affordability issue, and I understand that there's a lack of product. So we're buying into the community, and we're working within the guidelines that we have. So it's.
Yeah, and I don't think the panel is suggesting changing the rules right now. Notice, as you said, the guidelines are flexible, and how design team works and a client drives how you work within those guidelines is up to each individual applicant. So, we see some challenges in this one, and we're not saying it can't be resolved within the guidelines and the setbacks and everything.
I think we see it across all zones. I mean, downtown, we saw a lot last year, projects, and we saw ones that were not supported, and they were very maxed out, really dense. And then I'm thinking of the one on Pemberton that has quite a large courtyard. So instead of a solid block, it's got that Vantage?
Yeah.
A third of the property carved out of it. Different zoning, but yeah, I think we've seen it in all zones. So it's easy to push against the zoning, but I think the flexibility was a good thing for this neighborhood, and we should see more variety and more breathing room, because you can go dense. So you can make up that density across property lines with incentives for rental housing, with incentives for more employment space.
And I think the fact that they're all different lot sizes,
Yeah.
quite significantly different, that we will see variation in design.
And I think the subsequent applications
lot
as well
coverage.
are going to have, you'll see that breathing room because they're more than double the size of this lot. This is, this one and the one next are the smallest in that block. As you know, yours is the biggest.
The biggest, yeah.
So
We have lots of-
that breathing room is gonna come throughout the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Whether people are at 0 lot line or 3 meters, right? So,
I don't think it's fair to load all of the responsibilities for accessibility and all those other things on the other lot just because of the size of your lot.
no, it's not what I'm saying, but there's a program.
Going
We have
to
a pro
max
forma.
lot coverage ratio is just something that you do when you're trying to get as much square footage as you can out of your buildable. It's obvious. It'd be nice coming into a new community and working in a new community if you consider some of the things that we've said today, I think.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I've heard that you've got 20 years of experience in commercial development, and I have 15 years, and I actually brought commercial real estate for women into Alberta, so I have a really good understanding of what's happening, the trends that are moving. Some of the things that are happening in Squamish are really exciting, and that's why we're here. I think that you've got this really, almost this Portland kind of vibe that's coming in, and it's going to create some really interesting things with your retail. So absolutely open to talking to the folks that are static here and that have seen the community grow, but also bring some of these other ideas and concepts that are coming in that we think we'll be able to plug in, and you're going to be able to have an even more vibrant and dynamic community as well.
Can I just pose the question of, if we're discussing C right now, within the guidelines that we actually have a mandate to comment on, and in terms of what has actually been met for the mud zoning, what are the points that we can actually use to pass C?
Well, we passed C, and there were a whole bunch of issues about resolution of details. This is a DP, so I think it should be fairly well resolved.
Okay.
There's limiting distance issues. It would take, you don't even have to have a code consultant to do a quick limiting distance calculation on the code. So
As I mentioned previously, it meets.
Yeah, that's because I asked the
requirement.
question. I'm just trying to clarify that, like if we're going to have a list of those things, it's just, let's be really clear about what it is why we do need to see it come back here. Just out of consideration for the fact that this is the second time that it's been here, and that make sure that we are doing this for solid, reasons that are within our mandate.
Yeah, no, I think we're just in discussion. I think we
Yeah, no, but
discussed the
everything we've been
client.
discussing since then, it is actually kind of clear that we all have, I think, very valid opinions and concerns about it, but a lot of the stuff is not, we actually don't have a mandate to change the zoning or comment on it as of this point right here and now.
Well,
That's
that's right.
we're getting into a bigger picture of like, what can we do to change that?
And I don't think we were suggesting changing design guidelines or zone. So, me personally, I think we want to work within that. At the end of the day, this is an advisory design panel. Councilors here, we can take it to council and they can do whatever they want. They can write this notes.
The comments do come through to council.
Yeah, the architect's mandate under our ethics is for design panel is that we're supposed to be responding to form, character, and massing, including color materials, and then sustainability as well. That's our role. We're not supposed to be stepping outside of the box. So it's kind of interesting. So I mean, how do you respond form, character, and massing, character, So you ask questions about livability. Is it the right fit? Does it have materialities?
Relative to the zoning and bylaws, I think that's what we're talking about today is we can comment on all those things subjectively. idea, I think it's too dense, I think it's too big. But from an applicant's standpoint, they're challenged when from their side, they think it meets or is designed within the bylaws of the zone. I think those are two separate things, but they seem to be coming up quite a bit lately, especially when we're going to density. So I'm not sure what the right answer to that is.
I think separate discussion on it.
Yeah.
We've kind of gone away from you into a roundtable here, so.
Totally appreciate it, and I was
Yeah.
just interjecting as
Yeah.
in, we're really excited to be in the municipality. And we get that there's challenges within this new zone. So I just want to make sure that you know that we appreciate that as well.
We can maybe talk afterwards, but maybe we should conclude the formal part of the meeting.
Adjourn the meeting.
But we could keep going afterwards.
Okay, motion to close the meeting.
Are we not going to talk about the ADP award?
We can't, we are short staffed today.
Oh, okay.
Our minute taker actually has to go, so we limited it to two.
Okay, I missed that.
This part's discussion.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Let these guys go and make a big mistake.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Or you can move to roundtable.
Well, I'd like
Is that in the
to,
meeting?
Out of camera?
well, no,
Depends what you
in
want to do.
camera, but I wouldn't mind having a few minutes.
That's what that's.
You know, just because you mentioned council and, you know, I want to know how we're going to get our message through about the planning department, you know, and everybody's going to help. So I would suggest that with planning, have a conversation with council about some of the things that have been said here today about the Mountain Zone, especially with lots of other stuff happening on it, LCP.
So do we close to public at this point and then go to roundtable discussion?
Well, I don't know if we go in camera. do we?
No, we don't go in camera.
No, it doesn't.
You can excuse the applicant and move on to the next.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, you still there, Smithers?
Of course I am.
No, it's not. We'll just
I mean, we can.
close it to the applicant.
Laura Lindsay speaks.
Or your excuse.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
When someone
Bye.
can I guess that's. You can talk.
I think we should mention.
Didn't get a keyboard.
Yeah, we're playing calls here.
Yeah, I'm gonna head to it. Okay, excellent, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thanks, Asia. We'll just
Okay,
sit
yeah,
back down
roundtable.
over here.
I have a question. How is it that we end up in a situation where our zoning is written that every single structure that comes through is a box? It just matches like, why aren't we
Well, you
using?
know, I'd argue hard against that, because I
Floor-
like boxes.
But I like flexibility.
Energy
If you want to build a
performance.
box, you can, but if we're using floor area ratio as your maximum site, and with the envelope being much bigger, then it can be, you know, all kinds of things. There's also
That's
lots
what
of.
they're doing downtown, so
Yeah.
there's, right?
Yep.
I mean, I argue, I prefer less prescriptive zoning with clear design guidelines and energy and, you know, incentives for the things the community needs. Rental housing, good commercial space, better energy performance buildings, offer something back. You know, I think this building isn't probably 75% of really good things there. I would just cut a really big courtyard out of it, or I would do something more breathing room at the public space. So,
But I think that the problem we get into with having this looseness and flexibility that definitely allows for a lot of creativity in doing that. But when a project comes forward that technically meets all of the actual parameters, setbacks, like limiting distance, heights, whatever, whether there's a variance or not, it's hard for us to, it becomes a subjective thing. And I'm like, how do we, as a design panel, address the subjective part of it that is the collective experience that we all have in here to bring to the table?
you're allowed to be subjective, you can't not be, right? Otherwise, we're just looking for errors in omission, which is more like a plan checker, say it's over the setback, or it's over height, or it's too dense, looking at the like catalog of numbers on the front, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I have an opinion that if I get a zoning, not always, but that I can build 6 stories and 2.0 FAR, I know what that's going to look like as a block, and that's a challenge. Planning can only give so many guidelines, and some will give you exactly that as a maxed out chunk. And I think we've seen that downtown. I mean, I can picture them in my head right now. And then we can picture ones that have a little more finesse or offer a 6-story, like Vantage again did a Whistler grade envelope thermal performance and got an extra height. And they also have that big courtyard for social space.
Well, I think, what I think we're missing is, not so much on the design guidelines can be basic, but there has to be something in there to give the building points for something that's cool. In a building, there should be something that stands out from all other buildings so that each building's going to have something different. Courtyard's great. A big, huge roof deck planted with a huge garden might be good, or a big chunk taken out. And we miss that all the time when we go to property line with the box. And so there should be something in there, in my opinion, that allows property line, but there's got to be some improvement there.
Well, I think they're subjective. That's kind of Sham's comment. Like, you might want the setbacks, the stepping, and I fight because that's my wedding cake. It's really bad thermally, envelope, durability, all these things, but that doesn't, that's not going to affect someone else's opinion.
But when you bring back a box, like you say, it has to have a courtyard, or it has to have something that's made.
But that's in your toolbox. I would say, I just wouldn't do a box unless I am doing something else because it's not a good livable space or a good unit, or it doesn't allow or make for good pedestrian space. So I think that as an architect, I always fight to have as many options in my toolbox to then put to work. If we have, you have to do this or you have to do this, that's all you're going to get. And if that happens, all of a sudden 8 buildings go up and you go, ooh, that's not what we thought we wanted, then you're being too prescriptive and you're not going to get variety. So it can go both ways. We talked about it downtown a lot. And
a lot of clients will tell our architects this has to be simple and cheap, and then you end up with a box, right? And I don't want to.
It's a hard fight.
I don't blame the architect at all, because I know these things are driven by developers who some of them just see dollar signs more than anything else.
100%. Yeah.
And so how do we protect against that? It's almost a given. There's going to be 60% of developers that are just coming into the show. Right? How do we as a community protect against that?
Well, we see it. I don't think this is a criticism on the architect at all. I think I can see that is performa driven. We need X number of units. And then it ripples into the how many parking stalls we need. We have to do this much commercial to get this much residential. I don't think there's not the tact in the building. I think this is a max out
something that sets the building aside from other buildings in a cool way. That's where I think we're missing. I mean, where's the wording in there that says do something really neat?
Well, look at the first project today. You were on that.
Yeah, so I saw the warehouse.
It's not a great typology. It's a tilt-up concrete block wall. I cringe, but
it's not high density.
It's not high density, but they're doing a few things. The one thing they can do well, they did it well, right? So. And they pushed back in the performer. They're like, no, we need those N2 units when some people might want to focus. So every project's driven by money, especially nowadays with servicing and the cost of development is really, really, really high. So
but when you take a single family lot and get 80 units out of it, you have to give us something back.
Yeah.
You can't go property without something.
But that happens at rezoning stage.
Yeah,
the district went ahead. The district went ahead because of the fear that it'll just go all low density single family and rezoned it. It gave the zoning away in a sense.
But the asset is employment.
Well, so recommended by the planning department.
But you get employment and rental housing incentives, which I know we're going to see coming. So it might not be aesthetic benefits to the community always. That's subjective, but.
Yeah, I mean, this project is using that density bonus in the MUD 1 zone, and we're getting 30% of the units as purpose-built rental.
So I'm just curious.
There's always trade-offs.
On the second floor, of that project. It's kind of blank. So it's meant to be live work offices or offices or,
It's
because there's
meant
no.
to be office space, but
Mhm.
it's flexible.
It's flex
depending
space.
on who's gonna-
Yeah, so, but is it live also? Is it like live and work?
No.
It's not live work.
It's not
That
live
is
work.
not a requirement.
There's kind of no such thing as live work.
I
I
agree.
discovered in bylaws. We
Yeah.
talk about it like it's a
Yeah.
good thing, but then you get into business licensing and
Yeah,
different fire rates. So it never is truly live work.
yeah.
It's got to be one or the other. You can get a
That's
whole
what a lot of people
office.
think about the artisan and.
Yeah, yeah,
So-
so, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You should have a loft space that you sleep in,
Yeah.
and then down below you got your or whatever.
Or you can't have staff,
Yeah.
right? So it's a business, it becomes a business
Yeah,
licensing
one.
complication.
Yeah,
Office can have one.
I think
You can, yeah.
with the live work, you can actually have like professional services. out of your
And you
unit.
can do small scale manufacturing, which is, can be, yeah.
Well, jewelry, business.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, we threw in live work or an apartment, that, it's an option. We know most people are probably gonna go for the apartment use. And that's why we secured the first 2 floors as employment space.
It'd almost be great to see the whole, and we will soon, but the whole thing somewhat built out for you guys. I mean, like I said, I'm involved in the big one along Queensway, which is really big, like you were talking about. And you show it out as a 3D model and it's significant, but there's also a lot of opportunity there to do something. But it has challenges, like we were saying, the floodway and the amount of parking and distance of the neighborhood. They're doing a 2-level parking in this, that's not cheap. So,
You know what, part of the thing that actually gets me a little bit emotional is these things like, and it's a small thing with the elevator, being a small elevator and servicing a commercial on the 2nd floor and then a bunch of residential above. And I literally every day wait outside an elevator with mothers and children because it's underserving or it's too small of a service for the size of the building and or the uses that it's sharing above, and in this case, commercial on the 2nd
that's
floor.
purely developer. It's not building code, you don't even need
I know,
one.
but it really should be something that we watch for, because as soon as those, single mothers buy an apartment in there, they have to deal with that accessibility issue, and nobody looked out for them.
We just got a 4-story walk-up, so all day long, right? Brooklyn, no elevator. So I agree. It just.
There's
it's really
nothing
hard
we
to
can do
draw a
about that.
line.
The only thing we could do is somehow density bonus, an elevator, a second elevator, or a minimum size of an elevator.
After a certain number of units or something. It's hard to
Yeah,
take
but
up
I mean,
the
I've
space,
never
they're
seen that in the zoning
It's
bylaw.
worthy of a discussion.
Isn't that where a developer or
Yeah.
a client comes in and goes, I know my business about commercials, I need this and this, I got residential, I'm gonna offer all these things. I mean,
Yeah.
you can design, Lexus, or you can design a.
We're developing walk-ups intentionally because it keeps the cost down. There's small infill on 25 and 30-foot lots. You put an elevator and another staircase in, there goes your second unit. So
It's just if you expect someone to do commercial on the 2nd floor.
commercial, yeah, I'm not.
You have to be able to load, and it should be a full commercial
Great
size
elevator.
elevator. Ideally, I would like to see 9-foot minimum floors on the 2nd floor, considered for commercial.
I think what commercial is in Squamish is really up in the air.
Yeah.
People do not know. Developers are scared to build it because they think they can't sell it or rent it. And I don't think it's been proved. No one built purpose-built commercial.
They haven't talked to me yet, that's the
Yeah.
problem. Because I've done it.
Because
a
you're on
long
that
time.
side. But
Yeah,
the developers,
yeah.
at least coming across my desk,
Yeah.
they want to avoid it. So I think we haven't yet seen a successful, dense, mixed-use project with successful commercial tenants going in there to purpose-built. I think it's going to come. I believe in it. I really do. But right now,
Ted's got a
You guys
building
are
that
pushing
has
for it.
worked really well over the years, and is a great example with
Yeah.
a 2nd floor commercial in there, and the mix and the people that end up in there.
well, that's kind of what my
You
team
know,
is
it's-
almost catering to, right?
How many elevators do you have, Ted, in that building?
A bucket and a
Code
road.
violation for 17 years.
And that was the fight for Mud too, was less constraints so we can get that mix.
But it's not 2nd floor commercial, 2nd floor office.
No,
It is.
well, it's commercial. If you read the definitions of commercial and office, they're not dissimilar.
Yeah.
The only one in
But in reality, it is office.
no, you can do it
If
any
it's
sort.
functionally constrained, it might just end up as zoning office, but if you allow for flexibility.
Which it is now.
With the services and accessibility, you might end up with a different variety of uses. And a smart developer would understand, now I'm opening up my potential purchasers of that unit by double, rather than just.
Mud 1 and Mud 2 are both that, I think.
So it could be made flexible floor plates such that it could go either way?
Yeah, well,
That would be ideal.
complicated
Yeah.
building code issues,
Yeah.
you know, and
But I just came back
Downtown.
from Tokyo and they got 6-floor commercial, right?
Yeah.
So it's like-
well, now you can do commercial on any story downtown. So it doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
at one time it was ground floor commercial and second floor office, and people freaked out because that's a prescriptive and it's tough to rent. Now you can spread that anywhere within your 4 to 6 story building, which is a great thing. So you could build a 4-story timber frame open loft, kind of like this, and infill depending. So it's there, and I think we just need to see the right projects kind of start to.
We have a few commercial buildings downtown, like the Cornerstone, that are, you know,
That's
full,
not the only one.
full-on commercial building. That's the only one, yeah.
Yeah. But it works well.
It works.
right? And that could be residential on the top, right?
Yeah.
As a
Big-
typology.
Big space on Cleveland is vacant for months.
Yes.
Like just bought
Flea
these
market or
for-
whatever,
Yeah.
Rancher Snapper or something, can't remember what it's called, but that's empty.
Mhm.
And I don't know if someone's in there plan, but it's a huge space, it could be divided, but no one's renting it right on Cleveland. So, Philp,
Oh,
are scared of that.
the Red Apple store?
Okay, yeah. there's red
Yeah, no, I
outside.
just had a deal that just cratered yesterday on that. And it would have been a fantastic use.
Right.
But
It's-
you know-
people are scared of.
Big
It's-
ones.
It's actually, you'd be interested in this,
Chunks.
it's a code issue, because we had to go from, we wanted to go from retail to assembly. It triggered a change of use, and then all the structural upgrades got kicked in. And the client was going, I have to spend $400,000 on this building that will get torn down at the end of my lease term, because it is eventually a redevelopment site. So it's, and so how do we get around
Parking,
that code
then it
issue?
tips your parking too, if you go change of use, all of a sudden you need. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Parking kills every good idea.
Yeah.
Parking and fire truck.
So I wonder how small communities get around that. I mean, you can't, if you're up north of DC, you can't expect someone that changes the use
Well, different parking bylaws.
totally upgrade their building because BC building code says that's how.
No, it's not building code, it's municipal.
In this case, it was.
No, I think it's building code. It's
For parking?
No, for
Oh,
offices.
triggered upgrades,
Yeah, it's triggered upgrades, I was talking parking. So if you go from a grocery store to a restaurant assembly use, the requirements for parking are quite higher.
Mhm.
So it's small.
And I think we
housing.
have something in the zoning bylaw about downtown and the fact that when businesses change, you can maintain your parking,
Same on,
Yeah.
parking that's been set aside for the previous
In
business.
this case, parking was fine. It was the triggered seismic
Yeah.
upgrades.
Yeah. or combustible, non-combustible, which are a lot of things here.
Yeah, well, there was some fire stuff to that, it wasn't major.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that's causing this building to be vacant for another 5 years, then where is the solution, right?
There's ways you can design buildings, but it costs money, so often they don't integrate that flexibility. It takes effort and money.
Well, so that probably did change hands a while ago. So apart from just chatting on, is there anything that planning wants or we can do to take advantage of the knowledge we have here to help with the bud zoning? Other than, I guess, everyone reading it and sending in their comments, I mean, is there, I always sit here and I listen to all the thoughts, and then I get back to council, and of course, the project's coming forward through, and I think, well, you should have heard what the guy said at the table, you should, you know.
Mhm.
And I always felt like we do get the comments, and I read them, and if we stick out, I'll read it out to council, but we're not really getting through to council, so I think it's
Well, we do
planning's-
attach the ADP minutes to
No, I know you do, I said, I read
DP
them.
reports, so.
I think you almost need the
I
separate
mean-
meetings, like
I
I like.
watching the exciting online footage.
Well, sometimes if it's controversy, council will, you know, depending.
I think
I think it should be,
when we bring back the first application for council's consideration, that will be an opportunity to talk about the zoning. And council will have to prioritize what other problems we have to juggle to fix
make it successful.
Yeah, to make it successful. There's other problems that we could jump out at today and get in front of the train, but
I like when the projects come before their DP application on a big, like the Salterra, right? AKs came with colored blocks, and right away we identified, and that's what I'm proposing for the big one here, because it's just too many. Matt, if I throw 10 buildings at us to review, we'll be talking for weeks. But if we say this is where the use is, this is where the parking is, and a really overarching zoning diagram.
For that whole zone.
Yeah, I think, but maybe for a new zone, it's important. Maybe for these guys, if they came saying, here's our buildable area box early on, I wonder if that would have helped them then revise the building. I mean, you could probably speak to the density of the project. Was there ever any design iterations that weren't as dense from the client, or was it, are they pushing the density?
Yeah, we started with parking in the back, and you know how that works, not in, you know? And yeah, so we wanted to get building on the ground, not cars.
Well, I mean, master plan for the area.
But who pays for that? Hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's not one property owner, which is a good thing.
And Jonas, I mean, he nailed it. We were scrambling to get something done because we were basically getting a duplex subdivision from the one property, and that
And you would have for the rest.
and that would have been there forever. So, you
There's
know,
really good density.
we were scrambling. We tried to create the zone, and now that you guys, I think you've done an awesome job of pointing out kind of the holes in the zone, or now we're seeing what it actually looks like when somebody gets their hands on it, then we can, make tweaks if it is council's priority to do so.
I think your point on the workshop is a good idea. I mean, I know Whistler ADP always encouraged a workshop on something that's newer to the blocks, and it was really useful. The client and the consultant would spend a whole lot of time going too far down that line, and give them some valuable input early up.
Are we too far down the line in this neighborhood?
Well, no, but I mean.
no, but I think we've got 3 out of the 5 properties up for a DP.
They're all the smaller lots, so it might just be me.
Yeah, I just think the
Hey, when are you
entrance
bringing it in?
Pretty soon.
Entrance off of Progress Way would have suited this property really well for having potential shared parking over back. Because there's not going to be any parking on Government Road. And Jen says that we're commercial there.
It's going to be a walkable neighborhood.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of parking on the other lots, hopefully it cross-pollinates, but it's, when you're the first one in, it's gonna be hard.
You know what's one thing that was absorbed by, during the MUD 2 review, that I thought was a really nice adjustment was lowering the lot coverage ratio. I think that's going to ensure in that zone that we've got some great public space in between various buildings you could build down
I
there.
fought that one
I
really
was
hard.
just gonna say, but you can speak to that,
Because what
but
you
you're
end
still
up with is
pushing on
parking
that.
lots.
Yeah.
And they're underutilized urban spaces, and we're catering to cars. It kills me, we have dense surface park, they're not plazas, they're not courtyards, they're not nice parks, they're parking lots for the density.
But I was going to say, I agree with you on that, but I was going to say that maybe you could up that lot coverage ratio if you provided a public space on the second floor or
It
something
is.
like that.
Isn't that the kind of gist of MUD 2?
Yeah.
There's a density bonus if you do a courtyard at level 2.
Yeah, so.
But still, it's not built area, it's
But what about level 1? What's there for them? Instead of a
parkade.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you can do public space, accessible, but it's
So-
rarely done because the incentive isn't enough.
Yeah.
So on the workshop concept then, how do we do that?
I would suggest that first we bring an application to council, because council has to have a shake at it, whether council feels like we need to update the zoning, and then we bring it back to ADP for a workshop.
Sorry, when we were talking workshop, I was talking about project workshop. So like an applicant comes in early, pre-application, and just brings in a project very raw.
I mean, I'm happy to ask our client.
So I
if they're
wasn't
willing to-
suggesting
Sure.
workshopping the mud zone, but bringing in a pre-application for a client's benefit.
Yeah, we can recommend that to clients.
Yeah, we were gonna
Can't
request
require
it, because I liked how the Solterra one, I thought that was useful. So from a
Yeah.
planning perspective for the client, I've advised them intentionally, we're holding back, because all this is helpful. If we don't know what's happening around us, it's really hard to design such big. So my intent was to bring it, if we can expedite it, great. We haven't even done a pre-app meeting, because the site plan is so complex and so big. But if that helps discussion, we're gonna do it anyways, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you want to take it to council, that would be like throwing the applicant to the wolves.
What do you mean?
You mentioned letting it go to council, so
Well, I'm saying the discussion with council about whether we need to update zoning,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
should happen probably the best time is when we bring the application.
not the applicant, but them. So that wouldn't be fair.
Because there's only 5 properties.
Fine.
Yeah, and people, they've invested in these properties based on that zone.
So John and Chris, you guys know the mud zone really well, right?
Yeah, we
just
definitely.
worked for it.
I'm excited, I think it's an amazing, I'm really excited. It's challenging. But John and I were chatting before, and I said, I'll tell you the challenges that come out of things not to do with the commercial leasability. They come out of the floodplain challenges, or they come out of the parking challenges, and I would love his input, so.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I've been excited about the evolution of it. I think when we see a project like this come forward the way that it has, that's why I get a little bit emotional.
Yeah, you can
because
talk about it.
it's not what it's not converting correctly, right? It might if you had a willing developer that got kind of where we came from to get to this. But if you're coming in from the outside and you just see, hey, these are the rules, just build to the box and away we
They're
go.
the box.
You know.
And I guess the one thing that I should say is that this development is in the area 3. There's 3 areas in this zone.
That's right.
Area 1, very low density. Area 2,
Higher commercial.
mid density. Area 3, the highest density for residential. So we're kind of looking at the highest density portion of the zone.
And developers' eyes light up at higher density residential, so it's kind of what we're seeing. That the whole build out is going from residential down to light industrial with 1 or 2 stories.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, seeing the lot coverage ratio be so maxed out, that is the biggest sort of failing. I expected there would be some circulation space
On the bigger ones,
that was
it's
mindful
easier.
of delivery trucks coming to.
Ours
grade
is very
and-
open for lots of reasons, but it's the.
You'll probably end up that way, but we're
But
not.
it's the biggest,
on this side,
so you can't do that on any of the other 4 lots, they're too small.
Well, we'll leave it with Jonas about the pre-development roundtables.
Sure, but we can definitely offer that.
Only possible for probably 2 lots, it sounds like,
Yeah.
because the other ones are already further enough ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we still
Couple
have
of years
a week
coming
or
in.
2 to submit comments to know.
As soon as I get around 300,000 buildings
Wow.
in the area.
Yeah, I'll do that shameless plug again for sure, because it would be awesome for you
I
guys
gotta run,
to
I gotta
look,
pick up my kids.
to look at what DP area in the new OCP would apply to this area, and then look through the guidelines to be like, hey, would this help us get a cooler building? Or, you know, are the DP guidelines sufficient, but still flexible to encourage good design?
I think decide what your incentives want to be, that's cool. So Ted might want a cool looking building, somebody else might want energy performance, long-term durability, someone else might want livability. Yeah, someone else might want, right? And I think if that can come into the OCP, those are the overarching guidelines that, like me as an architect, I'd reference, okay, this is what we're trying to do to accommodate the OCP as well as the realities of flood, you know, part of this story. So everyone's going to have a different one, but if you clarify those to Matt and Sarah, that's what the OCP is kind of meant to be, right? What are the priorities of the community and the...
Yeah, and then the DP guidelines for form and character, I think we put a lot of effort into the interface with the public realm. Like, to me, that's what I really focus on. I imagine I'm standing in front of the development. How am I getting there? What's my experience? How do I access it? We placed a lot of priority on that, a lot less on like being like prescriptive about the architectural style. We back way off of that, like free reign, you guys do whatever you can come up with, so.
But was there not a public process in the review of the guidelines for that? Was there not a public process?
Yeah,
So
there was,
So that's
with
possible.
council and public input and stakeholder input. I mean, it was quick, but it was good, it was intensive. I thought there was
Yeah.
a lot of people who showed up for mud one and
Council's
one.
not necessarily, they tune into that stuff, you know.
I mean,
Yes.
Yeah,
from experience.
realtors, commercial,
Yeah.
experienced architects, landowners, for sure. I thought it was really interesting, it was diverse, and some strong opinions. So
Which is all good, right? It all shapes,
I
and
thought
that gives
so.
the diversity and stuff. The City of Vancouver Canby Corridor guidelines, the public hearing went like this. The Mayor Robertson says, does the applicant and the planning support, does it meet the planning guidelines? All in favor? Vote approved. Done. Okay. So it had gone through those hoops, it had satisfied all the guidelines, you know, obviously they just, so it was the shortest public
It's a
hearing
matter of
I've ever
understanding
had.
what you're voting on. It's a matter of understanding what you're voting on.
And I think they had that rigorous
Yeah.
chew out as to, are these the right guidelines, is it the right building form, you know?
And
so-
the guidelines, I can't stress how critical those are because council actually doesn't have discretion the way they do for rezoning. And I think Jonas is trying to touch on that as well. If they're meeting the guidelines that we have in front of us, council can't deny, they can make a decision on the variances. The variances are discretionary. The guidelines are not. If they're meeting them, they're meeting them.
Well, we can
So
change the guidelines.
that's our opportunity right now. That's why I'm like, you guys should really take a second look at these. Because that's what we'll all be working under for the next, whatever, however many years.
And it's arduous to change anything after the fact. right?
Yeah,
So-
exactly. It takes
And
so
that's
much
also
time to
really
change.
counterproductive, like downtown, we talked about this the other week. Guidelines for downtown have changed 5 times over in the past 10 years, and it drives landowners and architects nuts.
Drives everybody.
But it's a moving target, so get it right or get it a place where people are comfortable, and then have to let people build.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
Okay, let's
Okay.
shut this thing down.
Yeah.
Rare we have time.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll make that.
Seconded. Thank you. There is one thing asked by the mayor to make a presentation.
What's your project?
This is Santaville guidelines.